Chapter 1. In the city of Wei, the rain was heavy. The muffled thunder rolled through the clouds, crushing all the moisture out. From the first drop of rain to the downpour, it only took 2 breaths. In this short moment, Li Yunqin saw a corner of the eaves in the distance with the help of the lightning. On the eaves, a dark green Chi-Chi glanced at him in the heavy rain. So he covered the sword wound on his arm, that was about the width of a finger, and stumbled over there. If there was someone in the house, he might be able to save his life. If there was no one, it was better to be his burial ground than the wilderness. After his clothes were torn into strips by the plants, Li Yunqin fell through the door. Even in such a wet and dark rainy night, there was still a cloud of dust rising from the ground. The big house was gloomy, filled with the musty smell of years of decay, and the smell of blood on his body. There was no sound of people, no lights. Before he fell in, he knew that this was a ruined temple. Li Yunqin panted like a beast on the ground for a while, then struggled to get up. He rubbed his hands and feet against the long-abandoned incense table, turned around and sat against the door. He felt that he probably couldn't escape tonight. But it was better to die sitting like this than to be killed from behind. The lightning flashed again. Li Yunqin gasped for breath, as she struggled to raise her head to look at the incense table. The temple worshipped an unknown statue of a god. The paint was peeling and half of the body was missing. He didn't know who it was. He sighed and patted the legs of the statue. He smiled bitterly and said, "There is no incense in the wilderness. You must be miserable." As soon as he finished speaking, he heard the sound of cloth shoes full of water falling on the ground. 2 Taoist priests rushed in from the rain, holding thin swords as wide as 2 fingers. The rain gathered from the body of the sword to the tip of the sword, making a series of sounds on the bluestone tiles. "Hand it over," the Taoist priest said. "We will spare your life." The lightning flashed across the sky again. Li Yunqin saw the faces of the 2 people clearly. He was about 18 or 19 years old, and there was even a hint of childishness between his brows. Li Yunqin sighed in her heart. His fate was too realistic and cruel. Shouldn't it be a wandering master who saw him and took him to a meteoric rise because of his love for talent? Now that things have come to this, shouldn't it be some kind of deity in the clay statue in the temple who will show up and save him? He clenched his teeth and sighed. What's the point? Didn't you say that cultivators pay particular attention to forgetting emotions? Can't you just let me go? The Taoist priest's brows relaxed a little. He lowered his voice and said, "It's not impossible. As long as you tell me where you hid that thing." Only a fool would believe him. Li Yunqin just wanted to stall for time and recover some strength. Since they were going to die tonight, it would not be a loss for him to drag one of them down with him. However, the other person saw through his thoughts and thrust his rapier forward. The tip of the rapier was only a hair's breadth away from his throat. "I said I would spare your life. If you don't say it, I have 100 ways to make you speak. If you know what's good for you." When he said this, he paused for a moment, because he found that Li Yunqin's eyes were frozen, as if he had found something amazing behind them. But the Taoist priest immediately sneered. "Playing such a small trick in front of I. You are really—" This time, he did not finish his words. But he did not stop on purpose, because his head suddenly rolled down from his neck, splattering blood all over the ground. The other Taoist priest hesitated for a moment because of this scene. He did not believe it was real, until he saw a huge hand covered in a greenish-gray hard armor reaching out from behind and grabbing his companion's body. He suddenly widened his eyes, turned around and stabbed his sword behind him. Another flash of lightning accompanied his sword, and he could clearly see the thing behind him. Or rather, he could clearly see one of the eyeballs of the thing behind him. It was a huge blood-red eyeball that was as tall as half of his height. There was a long and thin black pupil in this eyeball, which was staring at the people in the room. His terrified and crazy face was reflected in the lightning. The Taoist priest's fine steel sword was stabbed into this eye, but he could not move forward. The monster outside the temple casually swung its claw again, and his sword was broken into pieces. The Taoist priest wanted to abandon his sword and escape, but another claw reached in and grabbed him. The Taoist priest began to scream and tried to break free from the giant claw. This action seemed to annoy the owner of the eye. The claw exerted force, and the Taoist priest's head exploded like a watermelon. He did not scream anymore. Once the screams stopped, all that was left was the overwhelming sound of rain and thunder. Li Yunxin widened his eyes, staring blankly at everything in front of him, forcing himself not to make a sound. The huge eye blinked, and then moved away. Its claw held the two headless corpses tightly, and it retreated into the curtain of rain. Li Yunxin saw a huge existence swimming in front of the temple, the night and the rain gilding its hard skin to a greenish-black color. But he could not even see the shape of the thing. It was too big, and he could not even see a leopard through a tube. 2 or 3 breaths later, the thing disappeared from the door. Li Yunxin waited for a while longer, still not daring to get up. He was afraid that the noise he made would attract the monster back. But the next moment, he realized how stupid his decision was. A black shadow covered in water walked through the door. The shadow dragged 2 things in its hands, rubbing against the bluestone floor, making a hoarse rustling sound. But the rustling sound quickly turned into a more viscous muddy sound. Li Yunxin smelled the suffocating smell of blood. He knew what the 2 things were. They were the headless corpses of the 2 Taoist priests. The newcomer dragged the corpse to the front of him and looked at him. He let out a low, bone-chilling laugh. "You can make a midnight snack." Li Yunxin realized that this thing was most likely transformed from the giant thing outside the door just now. She didn't intend to kill him for the time being, but he did not dare to run in front of that terrifying unknown power. He felt that the wisest choice was to stay here and wait for the right time. As for when, he did not dare to think about it. The black shadow sat cross-legged in the middle of the hall, laughed strangely for a while, and said, "Bring the case to the center." Li Yunxin was stunned for a while, then realized that it was referring to the incense table behind him. He quickly gritted his teeth, endured the pain, and moved the dusty incense table to the center, then quickly took a few steps back, away from that thing. The black shadow reached out its hand to touch the incense table, and a burst of fire rose. With the help of the fire, Li Yunxin finally saw the person's face. He was stunned again. It was not because the person looked terrifying or ferocious, but because he looked too ordinary. It was clearly the face of an ordinary handsome young man, not the melon-skinned big ghost that he had imagined. However, what the other party did next made him realize that this was just a human skin that the terrifying thing was wearing. The handsome man stretched out his hand and tore off an arm from the corpse. Then he started to roast the arm on the incense table. Soon, a smell that made Li Yunxin nauseous filled the hall. The man looked at him with a smile, put the arm to his mouth, and opened his mouth. The corner of his mouth reached his ears, revealing 2 rows of razor-sharp teeth. He swallowed half of the arm in one gulp, and the uncooked blood and human oil flowed between his lips and teeth. As he chewed on the bone, he said, "You're quite bold, young man. Bold people, fat and oily, can't eat like this. You need to steam it slowly, slice it and air dry it. When it's cloudy, you can eat it with wine." Li Yunxin gritted his teeth and sighed. He was silent for 2 breaths, then suddenly looked up at the other party's eyes and asked, "What are you?" The young man pulled off another arm and roasted it, then squinted his eyes and smiled. "Aren't you afraid?" He rolled his eyes again. "You can call me the 9th young master." Li Yunxin's voice was trembling. "I was chased by these 2. Thank you, 9th young master, for saving my life." The 9th young master grinned and laughed strangely. "No need to thank me. I will eat you tomorrow. You can thank me with your body." Li Yunxin gritted his teeth, took a deep breath and said, "The 9th young master saved me tonight. It is fate between us. If you eat me tomorrow, it will be a pity." The young man laughed strangely. "You idiot, do you think you are qualified to be fated with me? You are just a—" As he said this, he suddenly stopped laughing. Not only did he stop laughing, but he also frowned, as if Li Yunxin had suddenly become a monster, and he was immortal. The 9th young master stared at Li Yunxin for a while and blinked his eyes. Strange. You have an interesting fate." He shook his head, looked at Li Yunxin again, and said lazily, "Then I will spare your life for now." The cold wind outside blew in with the water vapor, making a whooshing sound, and the fire flickered. Li Yunxin's heart beat violently along with the fire. He survived for now. However, He knew that the reason why he was able to survive was perhaps because his life providence was truly interesting. Or perhaps it was because the murderous and man-eating monster, ninth young master, found his attitude amusing. Maybe the ninth young master only saw people who trembled and knelt down to beg for mercy. He was afraid that the horrible monster would change its mind. So he forced himself to move to the side of the fire and tore off a piece of cloth from a corpse. The ninth young master looked at him in surprise, but didn't say anything. Li Yunxin used his fingers and teeth to wrap up the sword wound on his arm. Then he turned over the corpse and took out a few sorghum cakes from his waist bag. The cakes were wet and soft, soaked not only by rainwater, but also by blood. The ninth young master stared at him with interest with his narrow and dangerous eyes. Li Yunxin picked up the Taoist priest's thin sword on the ground, skewered the cakes, and roasted them over the fire like the ninth young master. When the biscuit was slightly charred, Li Yunxin plucked one from the sword and brought it to her mouth to take a bite. With a slight cracking sound, the burnt aroma and flatbread filled his mouth. But he tasted something else, something different. It was the taste of human blood. He chewed and swallowed it without changing his expression. The ninth young master suddenly clapped his hands and laughed. What a wonderful person! I've seen a human devil who liked to eat the flesh of his own kind, but not as interesting as you. Li Yunxin felt that he had figured out the ninth young master's temperament, so he mustered up his courage and said, I've never heard of a human devil. The ninth young master is experienced and knowledgeable, I think. Before he could finish his words, a sudden clap of thunder sounded above his head, and the ground seemed to tremble. The clap of thunder seemed to have startled the ninth young master. He put down the human meat in his hand, stood up and looked up. After a while, he suddenly frowned, and immediately turned into a cloud of black wind, leaping out of the door. Seeing it go out, Li Yunxin did not hesitate this time. She picked up the thin sword in her hand and rushed into the curtain of rain with all her might. Then, she ran into the dense forest with all her might. Chapter 2. Li Yunxin ran nonstop in the forest for 6 hours before he finally fell to the ground. At this time, the sky was clear, and the morning sun was shining in the east. He heard the sound of rushing water and knew that there was a river nearby. So he rested on the ground for a while and forced himself to look for the sound. He slowly walked towards the river and finally saw it. It rained heavily last night. The muddy water rolled down with dead branches and rotten leaves. It was not wide, but it was enough to make him lose the courage to cross the river. On the other side of the river, there was a building with green tiles and white walls. It must be a town. Li Yunxin wanted to go to that town to find some food and drink. But first, he was unable to cross the river. Second, he was worried about the demon-like ninth young master. In fact, he was a man-eating demon. He thought it was better this way. If the demon wanted to chase him again, he would definitely go to the nearby town. Then he didn't stop, and continued to walk down the river, going a little further. If an ordinary person fell into such a situation, he probably could not survive in this forest for more than a few days. But Li Yunxin had a treasure. It was the treasure that the 2 dead Taoists wanted him to hand over. He lied to the 2 Taoists that he hid the treasure somewhere. So they chased him all the way and did not really kill him. Now that he thought about it, he felt a little confused. The 2 seemed to be Taoists who lived in seclusion and did not understand the ways of the world. Why would they come to kill him and steal his treasure? Because the treasure was actually hidden under the soles of his shoes and stepped on it. It was funny that the 2 Taoists searched him after catching him, but did not pay attention to his shoes. Probably the 2 Taoists did not dare to think that the clear jade slip, which they regarded as a treasure, would be so casually hidden by Li Yunxin in such a place. That was simply blasphemy. The so-called translucent jade slip was in fact a translucent jade slip. It was the size of a palm, rectangular, and transparent like a piece of glass. Maybe his parents really wanted him to live a stable life, and never mentioned this thing to him when he was alive. It was by chance that he found some clues left behind by his parents, and dug it out from a small mountain behind the village. After that, he was very disappointed. It looked ordinary, and in this world, it was at most of very pure glass that was rarely seen. As for how he knew about the translucent jade slip, and more about his parents, he had to start from the time the two Taoist priests disguised themselves and found him. But now was not the time to reminisce about the past. Li Yunxin had to force himself to move forward. He did not want to be caught and eaten by the demon. He still wanted to live. This was the first time he had seen a living monster. At that time, he was so terrified that he couldn't even spare the time to be shocked. Only now did he start to feel the lingering fear, and it was getting stronger and stronger. It turned out that such a thing did exist in this world, and there was even a possibility that it was eyeing him from behind. This emotion and the desire to live stimulated the potential in his body, and he walked for 2 whole days. On the 3rd day at noon he saw a bridge. Moss grew on the piers of the stone arch bridge that spanned the river. The river was no longer as turbulent as before. It had become clear and shallow. An old man was fishing on the other side of the river. Water plants floated in the water, and transparent fish and shrimps played in the water. Further away, there was a small town with smoke curling up. Li Yunxin's heart relaxed, and he almost fell to the ground. But he still forced himself to take a breath, staggered on the stone bridge with his sword, and went into the town. The old man raised his head and glanced at him. Li Yunxin knew that he looked very strange at the moment. His hair was disheveled, his face dirty, and his arm was injured. The cloth wrapped around his arm had been soaked with blood, and the wound was a bit numb, but not very painful or itchy. Li Yunxin knew that this was not a good sign. His clothes were ragged, but he carried a fine steel sword in his hand. This was not something an ordinary person could use. He lowered his head and quickened his pace. After a while, he saw the memorial arch at the entrance of the town. Qinghe Town. Under the memorial arch, 2 black-clothed servants held short sticks and frowned at him. When he came closer, they stretched out their hands to stop him, and stared at his sword warily. "Where are you going?" Li Yunxin felt more and more tired. It was good to run for his life in the wilderness, and he always had a breath. But now that he saw people, his breath had long dissipated, and he felt that every muscle in his body wanted to relax. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay awake. "I met a bad man on the road." When he said this, it was as if he had exhaled the last breath in his body. He only felt his vision go black, and his body leaned forward. Li Yunxin instinctively wanted to use the long sword in his hand to support himself. But he did not expect his wrist to tilt, and the tip of the sword went straight towards one of the servants. So the last words he heard before he fainted were, "Oh, what a thief!" After waking up, Li Yunxin realized that things did not seem to be good. He was surrounded by a cold and damp musty smell, and the room was very dark. He looked around and found that the room he was in only had 3 walls, and the other side was a wooden fence with a rusty iron lock hanging on it. Outside was a dark corridor made of bluestone, and there was an oil lamp in a groove in the wall. He was thrown into prison. He quickly touched the soles of his shoes, and found that the jade slip was still there. The people outside seemed to hear him, and soon a servant with a gloomy face and a knife at his waist came over to look at him. Then he broke the lock and opened the door. Li Yunxin looked at him calmly, and found that this person was actually dressed differently from the 2 he had met at the entrance of the town. There was a green peacock feather on his black hat, and although it was a little bald, it still meant that this was the county's constable. At least in this town, he was a big shot. The constable's surname was Xing, and his first name was Li. Recently, because of a matter, he was in a bad mood. Last month, the county magistrate's son took people to the spring hunt, and went into the wild forest on the other side of the Qinghe River. He did not come back that night, but 3 days later, Hunter Xian, who had accompanied him to the mountain, came back alone. The old man was covered in blood, and his hair was unkempt. He told everyone he met that the county magistrate's son and 2 servants had been caught and eaten by demons. When Constable Xing arrived with his men, the old man had already gone crazy, and could not ask a second question except that one. He had heard of demons, but it was like hearing that someone suddenly had a photographic memory after a serious illness for 3 years. Who would believe that such a thing could happen to their own family? If someone died, they would say that they had been caught and eaten by demons. What was the point of law and discipline? Moreover, The person who died was his own son. The county magistrate was furious and threw Hunter Xian into prison and strictly ordered Constable Xing to arrest the murderer within a time limit. Constable Xing stared at Li Yunxin's arm and said, "That's a sword wound." Then he looked at Li Yunxin's eyes and said, "You killed someone. It was the sword in your hand that hurt you. That sword shouldn't be yours." Li Yunxin shook his head and said, "I didn't kill anyone. It was just self-defense. I met a demon." A strange expression appeared on Constable Xing's face, and he increasingly felt that his guess was correct. This youngster was too calm. Even if an adult woke up and found himself thrown into prison, he would panic for a while. But not only did this youngster not panic, he was also very calm. It could even be said that he felt somewhat at ease. In fact, 3 days had passed since Li Yunxin fell into a coma. The reason why he hadn't woken up earlier was that a terrible thing had happened in Gai County upstream of the Qing River. The remains of 2 Taoist priests were found in an abandoned temple. It seemed that they had been killed and then roasted and eaten. There was a broken fine steel sword at the scene, exactly the same as the sword the youngster was carrying. Some unusual things were found on the youngster's body: talismans, pen and paper, as well as some strange bits and pieces. Constable Xing went to Gai County and felt that things were gradually becoming clearer. This youngster might be a painter, a crazed painter. He ate people. With this inference, many things seemed to be perfectly explained. Now, he only needed to prove that he had the ability to kill and eat people. Today was the last day of the county magistrate's deadline. As long as he had the ability. "You're a painter and know some evil magic," Constable Xing said. "We found some things on you. That's why you killed and ate people in Gai County, and even earlier, you killed the county magistrate's son." Li Yunxin sighed in the dim light, feeling that his hunger was about to destroy him. But he still felt a little at ease. At least here was much better than in the wilderness. He didn't have to worry about the 9th young master coming to eat him, nor did he have to worry about being hunted down. "I've lived in a mountain village in Dingzhou since I was a child. My parents taught me a few tricks. If you say I'm a painter, maybe I am. But I didn't kill or eat people." Saying this, he sighed again and didn't say anything else. He thought for a while and raised his head. "Actually, it's useless for me to say anything. I guess you might need a scapegoat." "Well, no matter how you deal with this matter, I guess the execution will be after autumn. It's only spring. I need some medicine and something to eat. If I die, you won't be able to explain yourself." Xing Li's frown deepened. He stared at Li Yunxin for a while, then turned around and walked out of the door. After locking the door again, he couldn't help but ask, "Is what you said true?" Li Yunxin spread his hands. Xing Li didn't understand what this gesture meant, but he could guess that the other party was expressing his helplessness. "Where's the monster?" "You won't believe it either," Li Yunxin said. Xing Li walked out. In the corridor, a servant dressed in black came up to him. "Chief Xing, how is it? That young man isn't simple. He's quite a character." Xing Li hesitated for a while and said, "What a pity. Go and put up a notice that there are bandits nearby. Tell the townspeople not to go into the mountains." "Yes. Last month in Qinghe, 3 days ago in Gai County." Xing Li thought to himself that he must have slowly drifted away along the river. He probably wouldn't come back. Chapter 3. Qinghe County had 3 towns under its jurisdiction. The county government was located in the largest town, Qinghe Town. The county magistrate, Shen Jima, had a son 20 years ago, and had no son 20 years later. He was already mentally and physically exhausted, and looked like he was about to die. The only thing that kept him from falling ill was his desire to arrest the murderer, who killed his son. Right now his hair was in a mess. He stared at Xing Li for a while before asking faintly, "A painter?" "A crazy painter," Xing Li said. "We found talismans on him, as well as a brush and paper used for painting. Tang Zun knows that these traveling painters belong to the lower 9 classes of Jianghu. There are many of them who commit crimes in the streets. I went to Gai County and saw the situation there." Coupled with the sword in his hand, that person confessed. Painter was not a general term for a certain type of person, but a profession. The great Tao was invisible, and the world had spirits. But people believed that invisible spirits could be solidified through certain means, through books or paintings. Books were like talismans. Most of the Taoist priests were proficient in the art of talismans, and their ancestors were known as the master of calligraphy. Together with the master of sword, they were known as the two sages of the world. As for paintings, they were just paintings. Those who knew a little about Taoism would use ink and painting as a medium to steal some of the spirits of the world and seal them in paintings, which more or less had some effect. But people in the secular world did not respect painters as much as they respected Taoist priests. In the eyes of today's knowledgeable people, there was not much difference between those guys and the swindlers peddling life-saving jindan on the streets, or just slightly better. Skilled painters might have divine works. For example, the pine crane painting behind Tang Zun was created by a painter from the previous dynasty. Painting in the hall would indeed have the effect of calming the mind, and it might even be able to prolong one's life. But in the current dynasty, which had been established for more than 400 years, those methods that were originally only circulated in Jianghu had slowly withered. After all, painters were not like the Taoist priests under the master of calligraphy or the swordsman under the master of sword. They did not have the protection and inheritance of Daotong or Kenzo, so it began to become a mix of good and bad people. It was rare to see someone with real cultivation. Most of the rest were just swindlers who relied on foolish men and women to earn money. His son had died in the hands of such a lowly painter? Looking at his expression, Xingli added, "He's a young man with some cultivation. However, he had actually done such a heinous thing. My condolences, old lord." After a long while, the magistrate heaved a sigh of relief and said, "There's no need to go to court tomorrow." Xingli was taken aback for a moment before he understood. "Yes," said he. "And tonight he will break out of prison and run away. My lord, are you going to watch it personally?" Shen Jima's murky eyes trembled a few times. He slowly tucked his hands into his sleeves. "You came to Clear River with me from Cloud State. Li Heng. Li Heng has been close to you since he was young. I trust you." This was exactly what Xingli had expected. Even if the old man wanted to, he probably didn't dare to look at the murderer who killed his son. It was not that he was afraid of the murderer, but he was afraid that if he saw him, he would not be able to hold his breath. Xingli excused himself and turned around to walk a few steps. Shen Jima suddenly said, "Hunter Xian said it was a demon." Xingli turned around and said in a low voice, "I think old Xian was so scared that he went crazy and spoke without thinking. What difference is there between cannibals and demons and beasts?" He paused and took a deep breath. "Li Heng always called me Big Brother Xing. I have always treated him like a brother. Li Heng's enmity, there is no need for Darren to say. Even if I have to risk my life, I will avenge him. Fortunately, the heavens have eyes. Today. His voice choked up as he spoke. He took a deep breath to suppress his emotions and apologized. "I have been rude, my lord. Go. Shen Jima's tears flowed down his face as he waved his hand. "Don't let him die too quickly." "Yes." Xingli walked out of the door before exhaling the murky air in his chest. A breath ago, he had appeared to be in so much pain that he could not control himself. Now that pain had disappeared without a trace. My lord was old. As for what the young man had said, Xingli believed him. He had seen that thing before. Rays of light seeped in from the roof of the prison cell. This was probably a house that had fallen into disrepair. Li Yunxin lay on the damp straw, thinking about what he should do. He had never thought of himself as a painter. In fact, before Constable Xing said that he was an evil painter, he had always been curious about this profession. After he woke up, or rather after he was born, he lived in a mountain village in Dingzhou. The mountains were not green, the water was not clear, and the land was not fertile. It was one of the many remote mountain villages in the Daqing state. His parents were very kind and intelligent people. Li Yunxin had always wondered if they were the kind of hermits who had seen through the world of mortals. When he was 4 or 5 years old, and his father began to teach him some things, he confirmed his suspicions. It turned out that there was magic in this world. One day, the family was short of salt, and it was a long way to go to the county to buy it. So his father took a piece of paper and drew a bowl. He then dipped the paper in some salt and drew a line in the bowl. Then he lifted the paper and threw it. Snow-white refined salt fell from the paper in a rustling sound. At the time, the young father probably wanted to make his son happy. There was also a tree in the yard with a moonlight flower and the setting sun. But he did not know that his little son was not that simple. After that he learned this art. His father told him that a person who truly mastered this art was called a painter. To draw all things into a painting, to draw heaven and earth, from 1,000 miles of rivers and mountains, to a small mustard seed in a small space. This was a painter. The painter that his father spoke of was probably different from the painter that the common people knew. But Li Yunxin still did not know. The sunlight above his head slowly turned golden, and finally no longer seeped in through the cracks. Li Yunxin knew that it was already night. Footsteps could be heard from the corridor. A servant carried a tray to the cell door. He glanced at him, opened the cell door and walked in. He placed the tray on the ground. "Eat," the servant said in an angry voice. "Count yourself lucky. Constable Xing thinks you're someone, so he didn't give you any soup or water." After saying that, someone called him. He glared at Li Yunxin again, closed the door, and walked out. Li Yunxin glanced at the food. There was actually half a corn bun and half a bowl of porridge. It was good food. At least in the village, many people did not often eat corn bun. He hesitated for a moment, reached out to take a sip of the porridge, and then grabbed the bun to eat slowly. After being hungry for a long time, he knew that he had to eat slowly, or he would suffer. After eating the food and feeling a little more refreshed, he raised his eyes to look at the cell door. When the servant walked out, he had already noticed that the door was not locked. It seemed that the servant had forgotten about it. Li Yunxin stared at the door for a while with a strange and complicated expression. He realized that things might be a little unusual. He did not know if opening the door to deliver food was a local custom, but he knew that the wooden fence of the cell door was actually a bit high from the ground. Everything in the tray could be pushed in from there. He also knew that the lock on the cell door was rusty. If someone did not hesitate to open the lock when delivering food to every prisoner, the lock would not be like this. In other words, the servant deliberately opened the lock and came in, but deliberately forgot to lock it. Oh, this kind of thing. Perhaps a genuine 14-year-old boy would not be able to figure out the reason. But Li Yunxin was not a real 14-year-old boy. Constable Xing wanted a scapegoat. If it were him, he would do the same. The prisoner would escape and then be killed, and the case would be closed. No one would have to put in so much effort to catch a monster. He heaved a sigh of relief when he thought of this. At least from now until he walked out of the door and into the night, no one would disturb him. So after eating and drinking his fill, Li Yunxin found a comfortable spot in the pile of straw and fell asleep. However, at this moment, the two officials hiding not far away could not be as comfortable as him. The two waited for a while, but did not hear the expected sound of the door being pushed open or footsteps. That kid didn't see? It's a teenager probably. Damn it, silly goose. Say something. The servant in black sighed and shouted. Watch the cell door, we'll go drink later. Let's go, what else can go wrong? The other person said. The two finished their act and waited for a while. Finally they heard a sound. It was just snoring. Damn it, this silly goose. Chapter 4. Li Yunxin slept for 2 hours. After waking up, he felt more energetic, and the wound on his left arm seemed to have healed. It shouldn't be an illusion. After all, other than those things, he had learned many ways to strengthen his body when he was young. According to his father, only with a good body and enough qi and blood could he better control the Reiki of heaven and earth. Then it was time to go out. This was beating him at his own game. But even if he didn't go, someone would drive him away. 2 hours should be enough to wear out their patience. He felt that it was best not to refuse a toast to drink a forfeit. But after going out, he felt that he still had to adapt to the situation. Although he didn't know what was going on outside, Li Yunxin felt that it couldn't be more dangerous than being chased by the 2 Taoist priests and the 9th young master. Speaking of which, the 2 Taoist priests had real skills. Just a few talismans were enough to force him into a corner. If it hadn't rained for a few days, and he hadn't tried to destroy the talismans in their hands, he probably wouldn't have reached Qinghe County today. He got up, flexed his fingers, and made a few strange movements to loosen his muscles and bones. Then he pushed open the cell door and walked out. He didn't hide like an escaped prisoner. Instead, he walked out calmly. As he walked, he looked at the Qinghe prison. This was the first time he saw a prison. When he walked past a certain place, he purposely slowed down his footsteps and glanced at a door on the side with interest. After he walked past the door, the two servants hiding behind the door looked at each other. This person, what's going on? He walked so calmly. Didn't he know that he was escaping from prison? He took a look. Did he notice us? Strange. Let's act according to plan. We'll send him to Chief Xing later. The two were silent for a while. Suddenly one of them said, Did he really kill and eat people? A faint chill crept up his spine. After leaving the prison, there was a field outside. In fact, there were lights not far away. This prison was probably built on the edge of the town. In front of him was a forest, and the night breeze blew away the damp, rotten smell of the prison. Li Yunqin stopped at the door and looked left and right. He found that there were people closing in on him from behind, and in front of him. Blades flashed in the darkness. He could clearly see that Xingli was walking at the very front. Including the two behind him, there were a total of 5 people. He reckoned that he probably wouldn't be able to escape with his skills. The officer's martial arts were probably not very good, but his physical condition was not optimistic either. Then he said, You didn't do it very well. You got me to take the blame. But how do you know that the monster won't appear again? When the time comes, you'll have to kill a few more people, and you'll be badly battered. If I were you, I would think of a way to solve this problem once and for all. But whether it's a monster or a strong person, you probably know that you can't beat them, so you don't want to take the risk. So, you want to see if your luck is good enough. Maybe that guy will go far away after killing a few people. What happens elsewhere is none of your business. Xingli stopped a few steps in front of him, a blade in his hand. He frowned as he sized up Li Yunqin, not understanding why this youth was so calm. His tone of voice was more like that of an experienced and astute adult man. Because of the other party's actions and his own original intentions, he made some adjustments to his original plan. He couldn't help but say, Solve it once and for all. Don't tell me you have any other way. He didn't expect the other party to answer. It was only because the other party was different that he couldn't help saying this. But he heard the youth say, Yes, I might have some way. Xingli sneered. He heard the youth say again, You've seen that guy, haven't you? Otherwise, you wouldn't have looked for me so irresponsibly. You should at least try. Now you look like you're scared. Xingli was silent in the darkness for a moment. He clenched the blade in his hand, and a complicated anger and sorrow appeared in his voice. Who are you? He had said before that this youth wasn't simple, but now he felt that he had underestimated him. The youth waved his hand. Go, don't talk here. If someone bumps into us, maybe you'll have to kill me to silence me. By the way, you, go and bring me my pen and paper. He turned around and gave an order to a servant behind him. He took the lead and walked into the forest in the west. The servant looked at Xingli in a daze. Xingli frowned and thought for a moment. He said in a low voice, Go and get it first. The momentum of the 5 people was taken away by him. But it was mainly because Xingli had something on his mind. He followed behind Li Yunqin for a few steps, but he felt that it was really inappropriate. So he took big strides with his blade and walked side by side with him. Li Yunqin stopped in the forest. Xingli couldn't help but ask again, Who are you? Li Yunqin smiled. Didn't you say that I'm a painter now? Now, what about before? Before. Li Yun thought for a moment. Psychiatrist? But you don't understand. Now let's talk about this. I saw that thing. At that time, I was chased by 2 Taoist priests. As he spoke, Xingli still held his blade and looked at him vigilantly. 3 servants surrounded him with sticks. He spoke with great emotion. When he talked about the 9th young master killing people and eating people, the 4 people's faces twitched. They looked quite uneasy, whether they believed it or not. It was a little strange for a seemingly unfathomable teenager to say this in this kind of environment. After he finished speaking, he said to Xingli, "Now tell me about you." This time, Xingli thought for a long time and said in a low voice, "Do you really have a way? But you're just a painter." At this time, the servant brought Li Yunxin's pen and paper. Li Yunxin stretched out his hand. The servant was stunned and looked at Xingli. But Xingli seemed to be in some kind of mood, and had no time to be distracted, so he didn't say anything. Thus, he sent someone to hand the item over to Li Yunxin for some strange reason. He came late, and didn't hear what Li Yunxin said before. But he felt that there was no harm in giving the things in his hand to him. He was just a painter. He had dealt with this kind of people many times. Most of them were swindlers. Only a few of them had a little skill, but they were limited to spending a few days to draw a so-called calming and purifying painting. It looked good, but it was hard to say how effective it would be. So he didn't believe that this strange teenager could turn the sky upside down with these things. "I have a way," Li Yunxin said lightly. He reached out to take his things and looked at them. Everything that should be there was still there. This subtle tone made Xingli feel inexplicably at ease. He let out a long breath and waved his hand. "You guys step back." When the 4 servants stepped back, Xingli said, "I have indeed seen that demon. If you hadn't seen it, no one would believe me. 5 years ago, one day, there was a thunderstorm, and the wind was heavy. At that time I had a son. I was holding my son. Suddenly, there was a loud noise, and the roof was lifted by the wind. Then there was the claw. It wanted to catch me. I stepped back. Just like that. I accidentally left my son behind. My wife went to catch him. Then I caught both of them. Then that demon appeared in my house in front of me. That demon." Xingli squeezed out these words from between his teeth. "Then I only said that the wind and rain blew the roof down, and both of them were crushed to death. So this time, you knew that you couldn't handle it. That's human nature. After all, it's that kind of thing. How could you handle it?" Li Yunxin sighed understandingly. He took out a brush and moistened it with his saliva, then spread out a piece of paper on a blue stone nearby. The most important thing for a family is to be neat. Nobody wants something like this to happen. As he spoke, he sketched a figure on the paper with the help of the faint starlight. "Look, isn't it this guy?" His brush was very fast, and the image he sketched was also very vivid. However, Xingli still maintained a bit of vigilance. He narrowed his eyes to look at the paper, and found that it was indeed the demon that ate his wife and son alive 5 years ago. "It's him." Xingli gritted his teeth, and said with a trembling voice, "So are you afraid?" Xingli frowned. The next moment, Li Yunxin breathed out at the painting. The night of early spring was still a bit chilly, and Li Yunxin's breath turned into white mist. Then, the green light burst out, and the figure on the painting suddenly broke free from the binding of the paper. It expanded, stretched, and suddenly appeared in front of Xingli. "Here, I'll leave him to you. I've already said that I have a way." Li Yunxin threw down this sentence, and like a rabbit she ran away. This sudden change stunned Xingli. The painful memory, and the great fear that followed seized his heart. He stared at the terrifying face that he had never forgotten for 5 years, and was stunned for a moment. Then he shouted madly, "Kill him!" He knew that he couldn't run away from this demon. Since he couldn't run away, then he definitely wouldn't let go like that rainy night. The 4 people behind him were stunned. No one thought that a mere painter, a teenager, could do something like this. But Xing Li's saber had already slashed at the 9th young master. The strike, which was filled with despair and indignation, actually produced a whistling sound as it tore through the air. The saber slashed the demon's body. Then, the figure swayed a few times and disappeared. A piece of paper fluttered down. Chapter 5. Xing Li was stunned for a while. The slash had almost strained his arm. His fingers were still trembling, and he could not muster up any strength for a long time. He tried to slash the man with all his might, but all he got was a piece of paper. The 4 officers had never seen such a thing. In fact, Taoist priests could also make such illusions. But all the Taoist priests in the world were disciples of the master of calligrapher, so they would not do such tricks. Moreover, in a small place like Qinghe County, There were not many Taoist priests. The sudden rise of the figure and the disappearance of the green light left them dumbfounded. At least it looked like the work of an immortal. Only then did the messengers realize that the painter had pretended to play a trick on them, and then run away. A wave of anger rose in Xing Li's heart. This anger came from the two emotions of being lied to and being understood. After him, he took large strides with the steel knife in his hand. But the officers were a bit hesitant. "Boss, that man really knows magic." Xing Li spat on the ground covered with dead leaves without looking back. "If he really knew magic, he would have killed us long ago. This is called camouflage. If he escapes tonight, how are you going to explain it to the county magistrate?" In fact, he was not thinking about the county magistrate. He wanted to catch the boy and break his arms and legs. How dare he? How dare he use the thing that hurt him the most as bait? First give him a little hope, and then immediately destroy it. The chase lasted for an hour. The four officers might not have much experience, but Xing Li was an old constable. He used to be a hunter, but was later recognized by the county magistrate, Shen Jima, and became a public servant. Because of this, the traces left by Li Yunxin were very clear to him, and he knew that he was injured. He should have been able to catch him quickly. However, things were out of their expectations. Within an hour, the young man was actually leading them in circles. They were near the forest, and he did not run further. It looked like he was lost. Logically speaking, a boy who had only eaten once in 3 or 4 days, and whose arm was injured should not have this kind of energy. How could he persist for so long under the pursuit of 5 strong adults? At this moment, Xing Li began to suspect that there was something fishy about the story he had told of his past, that he had come from a mountain village in Dingzhou. His eagerness to catch the man grew more and more urgent, and he resolved to divide himself into 3 groups. The 4 bailiffs split into 2 groups, and he went alone. Since the young man was lost and couldn't find his way out, there was bound to be someone who could catch him. This decision was carried out. This was because the bailiffs also realized that since this youth had not done anything for as long as an hour, it was probably as Constable Xing had said. He only knew how to camouflage. So on this dark night they split up. After about a quarter of an hour, Xing Li realized that his decision was correct. A cry of pain came from the west. It was very short and abruptly stopped. The 4 bailiffs were his trusted subordinates, and had matured early. He knew that the scream did not belong to any one of them. Caught him. He snorted coldly, and ran towards the source of the scream. When he passed through the dense forest, shrubs, and mad grass, he finally arrived there and sneered. Li Yunxin seemed to have been knocked to the ground. At this moment, he was leaning against a tree so thick that a man could wrap his arms around it, holding his left arm. 4 bailiffs surrounded him, holding short sticks in their hands. Xing Li let out a long breath, gripped his knife tightly and walked over. It turned out that the young man was not as relaxed as he had thought. Right now he was panting heavily, his chest rising and falling like a bellows. It was clear that he was on the verge of exhaustion. Xing Li's face was gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "Run. Where can you run to?" Li Yunxin held his arm, and leaned against the tree trunk. He tilted his head and said weakly, "You look quite angry. You dare lie to me, you little bastard." Li Yunxin sneered, "You're crazy. I didn't provoke you, didn't offend you. I was just passing by your precious land when you caught me. And then you wanted to kill me. From start to finish, it had nothing to do with me. Now because I didn't want to be killed by you, you have a heart of glass? Do you think everyone in the world is your mother?" Xing Li didn't understand some of the words he said, but he knew it wasn't anything good. But he didn't want to talk to him anymore, afraid that a long night would bring trouble. This young man might not have any other skills, but his real skills were probably in his mouth. So Xing Li silently held his knife horizontally, took a step forward, and raised his hand to chop down. At this time, the young man suddenly called out, "You're finally here." Xing Li noticed that his eyes were looking behind him. He was shocked, and immediately realized that the young man's clumsy methods were just a bluff to make him turn back. So he only hesitated for a moment, and then continued to chop down. But this moment of hesitation gave Li Yunxin time to react. He tilted his head, and the knife chopped down on the tree trunk. Xing Li snorted coldly, pulled out his knife, and chopped again. Then he heard the sound of something tearing, like a heavy sack falling to the ground. A warning flashed through his mind. He immediately held his knife horizontally, turned around, and took a step to the side. He saw the scene behind him. The thick smell of blood permeated the air. The 4 people behind him had all fallen to the ground. Their bodies were already mutilated, or their heads had fallen to the side, or their torsos had been torn in half. Blood flowed out like a spring, quickly soaking a large area of the ground. It was just the time of one breath. This wasn't something a human could do. A great fear gripped his heart. He had to force himself not to close his eyes, raise his head, and focus his mind. Only then would he have the courage to look at the figure standing not far away. In the darkness he could see a handsome face as smooth as jade, wearing a cloud-embroidered robe, standing with his hands behind his back. His clothes fluttered in the night wind, not tainted by the smell of blood. Xing Li recognized this face. He would never forget it for the rest of his life. 5 years ago, the owner of this face had eaten his wife and child in front of him, then with a wave of his sleeve, disappeared into the clouds. It was that demon. His nightmare had come true. He was sweating profusely. His undergarments were soaked through in an instant. The scenes of the past kept flashing through his mind in a state of chaos. Xing Li's eyes widened and his throat gurgled. But his survival instinct prevailed. He immediately ducked to the side of Li Yunxin and put the knife on his neck. "Don't come closer," he said in a hoarse voice. "Don't come closer. If you come closer, I'll kill him. I'll kill him." The 9th young master stood there without moving. He looked at Xing Li and Li Yunxin with interest. Then he raised his hand and pointed at the young man. "Did you do this?" "I had no choice." Li Yun smiled bitterly and spread his hands. "Otherwise I'd be dead. I don't even have the strength to move now. Besides, aren't we friends?" "Friends?" The 9th young master laughed strangely. "What's that?" "It's like, we met on a rainy night, you saved my life, and we had a good talk. Then tonight, I remembered you. Although we're not familiar with each other, I thought you might be able to help me. So I asked you to come." Li Yunxin didn't care about Xing Li's trembling hand. He smiled and said calmly, "Although I'm afraid you'll eat me, I'm still willing to believe you. That's a friend." The 9th young master thought for a while and laughed in the night wind. "Seems like not eating you was the right choice. You're such an interesting little thing." Li Yunxin grinned. He heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. It's finally here. The great Tao is formless, and all things have spirits. Painters put all things in the world into their paintings, and integrated the little bit of spiritual qi into their paintings. Something like spiritual qi should be extremely sensitive to some beings. He had tried to put the 9th young master into his painting, so he lent him some spiritual qi. Whether he was a human or a demon, since he seemed to be omnipotent, he must be extremely sensitive. His father had told him about this, but tonight was the first time he did it, and he was right. As the 2 of them spoke, Xing Li was left to the side. He naturally felt that the situation wasn't good, and it was a little strange. So he pressed the steel knife down, leaving a bloody mark on Li Yunxin's neck. "You're in cahoots. I wasn't wrong." Li Yunxin frowned slightly and looked at him. "You're guilty. Tell me, are you ruthless or cowardly? The person who killed your wife and son is right in front of you, and you come to argue with me. You're so tolerant, but you're really ruthless to yourself. So you took it out on me, and your little heart couldn't take it anymore. So you flew into a rage." He slapped the ground and shouted, "Think of your wife and son. Dead. Right in front of you. Even if you continue to be a coward like a dog tonight, you won't be able to live. You killed me, and you'll still die. You watched your wife and son die, and you haven't learned anything yet. You want to drag someone to die with you. You're going to die today anyway. Do you want to die as a dog, or do you want to be a man and try to wield your knife? Your wife and son are watching." Xing Li's breathing became heavier, and the knife in his hand trembled. The 9th young master tilted his head, and he seemed to be more and more interested. "Are you afraid now? Are you afraid? Are you very afraid? Are you more afraid when you think that you might die? Are you still thinking of running away to live? I'm telling you, there's no chance today. You're dead. If you have the guts, take a deep breath now. Yes, take a deep breath like this. And don't think about standing up and rushing over to kill, 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 kill. Go now, 1, 2, 3. Go. I'll kill you. Xingli jumped up from Li Yunxin's side like a red-eyed wolf. When Li Yunxin counted to 3, Xingli swung his knife at the 9th young master. There was a puff sound. Xingli's head flew up. Chapter 6. Interesting. How did you do it? The 9th young master waved his hand to get rid of the blood between his fingers. I know every word you said was in the same rhythm as his breathing. You even counted 3 times accurately. But, how did you do it? Li Yunxin touched his neck. The wound wasn't deep. He spread out his hands. I told you not to kill me. The 9th young master sneered. You little thing, you still want to negotiate with me. Don't you know I should be angry? I'm not negotiating with you. I'm begging you, Li Yunxin said. There are many people who want to eat people, but not many people are as interesting as me. It's actually quite simple. Everyone is afraid, but they also have courage. It's definitely scary for one person to kill a tiger. It's not so scary for 10 people to kill a tiger. If it's 100 people, it becomes a form of entertainment. The tiger is still the tiger, but his thoughts are different. In fact, I've been preparing for it. I want him to tell me about his family and exhaust his patience. It's night again. People are easily excited in this kind of situation. It's easy to say, but I have to consider every word carefully and slowly guide and hint. In the end, you're right. Every word I said was in the rhythm of his breathing. I gave him an order at the last 1, 2, 3, and I didn't give him a chance to think. He was hinted at by me before, and now he follows my rhythm. Everything will be done naturally. The 9th young master thought for a while. It sounds easy, but it's hard to do it, Li Yunxin said. Ordinary people can't do it without systematic training. So you see, I'm so interesting. Interesting, you are interesting. 9th young master frowned and looked at him maliciously with his pale yellow eyes. So, I find you interesting and don't want to eat you because you did that? Li Yunxin spread out his hands and smiled honestly. Maybe, but it doesn't matter. You're so strong. You're so strong that killing is like playing. Even if I'm a scheming B*TCH, I can't hurt you. So, he said sincerely, don't eat me, okay? The 9th young master looked at him and thought for a while. Then he laughed and said, all right. But what is the scheming watch? Li Yunxin pondered for a moment. Something like a secret manual of martial arts. For example, it's a secret manual of my skill. I've heard of Chu Shi Biao and Zhou Biao. The 9th young master didn't seem to be interested in these things. He waved his hand and said, you owe me a life. Yes, you owe me your life. He repeated himself, as if this statement was very novel and interesting to him. He even laughed to himself. When I'm bored, I come to find you. If you make me feel bored, I'll eat you. After saying this, a cloud of mist suddenly appeared on the spot. His large sleeve spread out in the mist, and the scale's cold light suddenly appeared. The mist soared into the sky and disappeared into the night. After a quarter of an hour, Li Yunxin finally heaved a long sigh of relief. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 9 days. Yes. He leaned against a tree and slowly recovered his strength as he talked to himself. That's what happened. I'm about to start a magnificent life. 9 days ago he was still in Dingzhou, in a mountain village in Dingzhou. That day it was noon. He was sitting in a rattan chair under a tree in the courtyard, taking a nap. Sunlight shone through the gaps in the leaves and formed round spots of light on his body. His parents had passed away a year ago. He felt sad about this. Even if 2 strangers took good care of him and spent 12 years together, he would still have feelings that he couldn't let go. Furthermore, they were truly his birth parents. Thus, even though he felt that he shouldn't spend the rest of his life muddle-headed in this mountain village, he still stayed. The custom of the Daqing state was to mourn for the death of one's parents for 3 years. For him, this time was too long, but under the current circumstances, it didn't seem unacceptable. He was only 14 years old, although he already looked like an 18 or 19-year-old youth because of his strong body from a young age. He still hadn't figured out what he was going to do. Just like in the history of the other world, he was familiar with the Daqing state had scholars. In the eyes of the secular world, studying and becoming an official was the highest rank. Everything else was a small path. However, his parents seemed to have an aloof sense of superiority towards studying and becoming an official. They never placed much importance on this path of advancement. Although their family of 3 was publicly recognized as the only scholarly family in this small mountain village, Li Yunqi knew from a young age that the path his parents had walked should be even more mysterious and unfathomable than studying and becoming an official. He had skimmed through the classics and history, but he didn't put much effort into it. He was more interested in the skill his father had once displayed when he was 2 years old, turning paper into salt. However, after his parents felt he needed to remember things, they never displayed that kind of ability again. They only dictated some things to him and taught him some things, but they never systematically introduced anything to him. He felt that perhaps his parents planned to tell him some heart-pounding secret when he was a bit older, so he wasn't in a hurry. His temperament was not that of a teenager. Even if he couldn't be as calm as water, his experience as a reincarnated person allowed him to keep his cool. But he didn't expect that last spring, the 2 of them would suddenly die. Li Yunqi remembered that it was a thunderstorm night. He was sleeping in the west room. One after another, the sound of thunder woke him up. When he raised his head to look out the window, the world was a vast expanse of whiteness, and the lightning illuminated the room. The rolling thunder lasted for about half an hour. When he went back to sleep and woke up again, he found that his parents in the east room had already been turned into 2 pieces of charcoal. After searching for clues for nearly a month in grief, he came to a conclusion. It seemed to be an accident. This kind of thing seemed shocking at this time, and it might even lead to bad associations. But in the era he had lived in, it wasn't a rare thing. For example, there were people who were hit by lightning balls or struck by lightning, and they died like that. The discussion caused by this matter in the village didn't last too long. After all, his parents had been kind to others when they were alive, and the villagers had benefited a lot from them. Li Yunqi once had a trace of uneasiness, feeling that things might not be so simple. But after a year, that trace of uneasiness slowly disappeared. Until one afternoon, 2 Taoist priests came to the door. This was the first time Li Yunqi saw a Taoist priest. He knew that these people also had some magical methods, so he felt a strange sense of familiarity. Because he also knew that his parents weren't ordinary people. Even he himself had some tricks up his sleeve. The Taoist priest looked 18 or 19 years old, and the beard around his lips was still very soft. His face was kind, and he wore a green Taoist robe. He said that he was passing by this place, and the villagers said that his family had an empty and clean house. They asked if they could stay for a while, and they would compensate them with money. Li Yunqi grew up in this village, and most of his understanding of the outside world came from his parents. His parents were indeed knowledgeable and experienced, but he didn't have much contact with the outside world, not to mention these 2 young people who looked like he was. So at that time, he was indeed very happy. On the 3rd day, he chatted with the 2 Taoist priests under a tree in the courtyard, eating pine nuts that they had stored last winter. The pine nuts were placed in a small basket, and the small basket was placed on a square wooden table. The corners of the table were casually painted with cloud patterns, which looked very charming. The 2 Taoist priests were named Qi Songzi and Kong Songzi. This name matched the situation that day, and the 3 of them couldn't help but chat and laugh. So you 2 enlightened masters were originally in Xiangzhou, and you came here to gain experience. Qi Songzi laughed. We can't be called enlightened masters, we haven't reached the Tao yet. It's true that we're here to gain experience. You must know that to cultivate the Tao, one must first cultivate the heart, and cultivating the heart is actually cultivating the soul. When his parents were still alive, they didn't purposely mention this, so there were many things that Li Yunqi only knew how, but didn't know why. He humbly asked, cultivating the soul. What do you mean? Qi Songzi glanced at Kong Songzi, touched the fluff at the corner of his lips and laughed. Looks like little brother is also a person who pursues the Tao. Then let me explain. Everyone has a soul, strong or weak. As for us cultivators, We need to mobilize the spiritual energy of heaven and earth for our own use. So our souls must be strong. Only when our souls are strong enough can we use great magic power to extract the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. As for the method to cultivate the soul, it actually sounds very simple. It's to pass the tribulation. Pass the tribulation? Li Yunxin was startled. Qi Songzi laughed. It's not as scary as it sounds. The great Tao is formless, and the Taishang forgets emotions. Actually, people in the secular world are also passing the tribulation. And most of them are passing the tribulation of love. Look at those brave and fierce people in the marketplace. They get angry and their faces turn red at the slightest disagreement. Look at those scholars and beauties. They hate because of love, they get hurt because of love. They can't escape the 7 emotions and 6 desires. But as cultivators cultivate the heavenly heart technique, we comprehend the great Tao of heaven and earth. If our souls aren't strong enough, we'll always be moved by external things. How can we achieve a pure mind and see through all things? Maybe when we cast the technique to subdue the devil, our mind will be distracted, and we'll suffer a backlash. So the meaning of having a strong enough soul is to not be happy with external things, not be sad with oneself, and forget emotions. Qi Songzi's eyes brightened. Little brother is very smart, that's right. The state of absolute oblivion is the state that cultivators like us dream of. So cultivating the soul, abandoning the 6 desires, you first have to know what the 7 emotions and 6 desires taste like. Most of them, right? Qi Songzi shook his head. Not really, not really. For example, love. There is love between men and women, either happy or sad. The happy ones are willing to sink into oblivion, not seeking to be freed. The sad ones, before the pain reaches the heart, there's always hope. These 2 kinds, even if they know what love tastes like, they still can't pass the tribulation. You have to wait until you feel happy and sad because of love, until you're tired of it. Then you'll understand that love is nothing more than this. From then on, your heart will be free, and you'll be at peace. Li Yunxin peeled a pine nut and nodded. Oh, it's eating until you want to vomit, and you don't want to eat anymore. But I feel that there are many kinds of love. For example, liking a cat or a dog is different from liking a woman. Feeling sad because you lost money is also different from feeling sad because you were slapped in the face. There are so many kinds. How long will you have to go through the tribulation? Sigh. That's why people say life is bitter and short. Qi Songzi looked at the sky and sighed. His 18 or 19-year-old face actually had the appearance of maturity. That's why us cultivators must first seek longevity. Only then can we go through the tribulation. Of course, if someone has the luck and good fortune and obtains it, he glanced at Li Yunxin. If you obtain the famous scroll of an ancient expert, it'll be much easier. Chapter 7. Li Yunxin blinked his eyes calmly. What do you mean? What is it? On the other hand, Qi Songzi and Kong Songzi's expressions changed slightly. In the eyes of an ordinary person, this kind of change would probably not be noticeable. Little brother, have you heard of painters? This time, it was Kong Songzi who asked. Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows. Oh, my father mentioned it before. Kong Songzi said. Your father also knows about this? He is really knowledgeable. Then when he was alive he was. Qi Songzi signaled him with his eyes, then laughed and said, I've seen a lot of painters in the secular world. But we're not talking about those people. We're talking about the ancient masters. Nowadays, those painters in the marketplace have already become swindlers. Sometimes there are brilliant ones, but they can't be compared to the ancient masters. It's said that the famous scrolls passed down by the ancient masters sealed the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, as well as the joys and sorrows of all living things. For example, the famous scroll of the Pill Cauldron sect of the Prime Clear lineage, the Thousandly Desolation painting. If you use your divine sense to carefully experience it, you'll be able to feel the desolation and coldness. When the ancient masters put down their brushes, they would absorb the spiritual energy of the Thousandly Desolation painting. Experiencing the painting would be like experiencing it yourself, or even more. That's because the ancient masters had a higher realm, and had already integrated their understanding into the painting. If you experience the painting, it'll be like being enlightened by the ancient masters. If that's the case, why would you need to run around, sleep in the open, and think hard to no avail? Qi Songzi sighed. How many amazing geniuses have there been? Because they were just a tiny bit lacking. They weren't able to increase their cultivation and died of depression. Li Yunqing blinked innocently. It's like that feeling was taken into the painting and sealed away. Then, when others look at it, they can directly experience the experience of the painting master. It's like directly picking the fruit. That's right. Since this method is so good, then paint more. Qi Songzi smiled bitterly. How can it be so easy? The painting path has been declining for 1,000 years, and has already declined. There are 2 sages now, but 2,000 years ago, there were 3 sages, Sword Saint, Calligraphy Saint, and Art Saint. But Art Saint later entered the demonic path, and was attacked by the world's experts. Since then, the painting path's supreme secret scripture, the Jade Scroll, has disappeared. There are still some grotto heavens and sects that worship masters, Taoist painting masters. But even these people are far from what they used to be. I see. Li Yunqing nodded. Grotto heavens and sects. At this moment he looked like a student seeking advice, and his eyes were full of desire. Kong Songzi seemed to be a little anxious, but Qi Songzi gave him another meaningful glance, and explained patiently. There are 2 saints in the world now. Below the 2 sages were the Sword faction's 18 paradises, and the Tao Orthodoxy's 18 paradises, collectively known as the 36 paradises. These are the disciples and has Kong disciples. And they have them. They and they. He has. Below that, there were the 36 sects of the Sword faction, and the 36 sects of the Orthodoxy. These were the inheritances established by the disciples and grand disciples of the 36 paradise disciples. They were collectively known as the 72 sects, which were also quite impressive. Below them is the secular world. The residences of the 72 sects in the secular world, the heretical sects established by the people of the secular world, and the wild Taoists who betrayed their sections. Of course, there are also some independent hermits who are devoted to the Tao and cultivate the heavenly will technique. Oh, Li Yunqing nodded. Both of you are Taoists. Which grotto heavens do you belong to? Of the 72 sects are famous places in the world. Mortals don't have the chance to see them. As for the 36 grotto heavens, they are the residences of immortals. We are not disciples of the grotto heavens. Qi Songzi smiled bitterly. We are the rogue Taoists who cultivate the heavenly heart technique. Of course, the heavenly heart technique is the orthodox Taoist taught by the 2 sages. Sounds cool, Li Yunqing said. Oh, it means super cool. Although he didn't understand, Qi Songzi still cupped his hands. You flatter me. Then he looked at Li Yunqing. Little brother, you are not an ordinary person, right? I am not. Li Yunqing's answer stunned the 2 Taoist priests for a moment. They didn't expect him to admit it so easily. Then why did they waste their breath? Qi Songzi cleared his throat. That's true. Brother Li has a clear bone structure. You are definitely not an ordinary person. In fact, the 2 of us came here for Brother Li. Actually, Li Yunqing could tell. After listening to the conversation between the 2, he realized that his parents were probably not as simple as they seemed. He also realized that the thunderstorm a year ago was definitely not a coincidence. But if it was an enemy, why didn't they kill him? He couldn't figure it out. But this didn't stop him from speculating that the 2 Taoists came here because of the strange phenomenon a year ago. The villagers would occasionally go to the county town. There was no big news these days. So something like a thunderstorm killing 2 people in one night would inevitably become a topic of discussion for a period of time. It spread further and further, and was heard by someone with ulterior motives. Didn't they come to find him? The 2 Taoists might have thought that their expressions could deceive this 14-year-old boy. Or they might have thought that they had confirmed that this boy was a fledgling through the indirect questioning the day before. But the problem was, under the skin of Li Yunqing, he wasn't a real boy. At this time, he felt that his parents probably thought that if the 3 of them could live peacefully in this mountain village for the rest of their lives, They wouldn't tell him too many things. They were teenagers after all. If they knew too much, they would always cause trouble. If one day, there was a sudden change, and they couldn't live peacefully, then there was no harm in telling him in detail. But they didn't expect that they would meet such an ending and die. Thinking of the magical power his father had displayed, and then thinking of what the two Taoists had just said, a shocking and exciting speculation appeared in Li Yunxin's mind. Painting saint, painting Tao, painting master, the enlightened jade slip. That painting Tao manual, could it be with his parents? Heh, these two little Taoists, did they come to find treasures? Li Yunxin replied to Qi Songzi. Came for me? Yes. Qi Songzi said seriously. A year ago, there was a thunderstorm here. We heard about it, and knew that there might be a numinous treasure appearing. Brother Li's parents met with misfortune because of this. I was also very sad. But since it has come to this, and seeing that Brother Li is a person with a Tao bone, I will tell you the truth. Treasures are good things. If it's gold and silver, people in the secular world can enjoy wealth and splendor, and it can be considered as making the best use of it. But if it's something else, such as Daotong numinous treasure, Kenzo divine weapon, and so on, then it's not something ordinary people can afford. For example, if little brother obtains some Daotong numinous treasure, but you don't know the cultivation method, and you don't know the heavenly heart technique, then you're just like trash. Why don't you offer that numinous treasure to a certain sect, or even a grotto heaven? On one hand, you can make the best use of it, and on the other hand, maybe you can become a real disciple of the Taoist sect, a deity among immortals, and it will be of great benefit to you. The two of us came here because… Wait. Li Yunxin frowned and waved his hand. It means that you think that my parents and I are not ordinary. Then something happened, and you think that I have a treasure here. Qi Songzi was slightly confused because of his attitude. He looked at Kong Songzi and said, "That's true. But the two of us just can't bear to see that numinous treasure fall into the secular world. And can't bear to see such a talented and intelligent person like little brother. Then here comes the problem." Li Yunxin grabbed the pine nuts in the small basket on the table, and shook his head. "Since you think that the treasure can be offered to a sect or a grotto heaven. Oh, you said before, wow, what a great sect. Then this thing must be very precious. Then can you tell me what treasure you're looking for? I'll have an idea in my mind, and I'll go back to the house and look through it later." Qi Songzi's expression changed, and he was about to speak, but Li Yunxin continued to talk while grabbing the pine nuts. "Then there's another problem. You see, you think that my parents aren't ordinary people, so according to normal logic, I shouldn't be an ordinary person either. Then you shouldn't have fooled me with the words you just said. But you still did it. This means that you got some information about me from somewhere, and you're sure that I really don't know anything? You're just a kid? First, you don't know my situation, and second, you don't know what treasure you're looking for. So, you killed the person who really knew and planned to deal with me? Haha, that's right. That's why you don't know what you're looking for." The two Taoist priests looked at each other, and suddenly felt that there was a trace of evil in this youngster in front of them. He didn't look like a 14-year-old boy, but more like an old monster. But what he said was the truth. How could he think of that? "I also know that you two want to trick me into handing over the treasure, and then kill me." Li Yunxin sat up straight, and pointed at his own face. "There are too many flaws on your faces. People say that your eyes reveal a fierce light, but your light can be used as a searchlight." Kong Songzi suddenly sneered. "Oh, you're right. You're right, we killed an old guy who was injured. It said that he came from the Daotong Grotto Heaven. That's amazing. But now you're just a kid from the mountains, no matter how much you know. Ha ha ha. Well, you think you have some tricks, but do you know the tricks of us brothers? Your parents are just two traitors of the true martial sect. They stole a treasure and fled here. It's said that their talisman skills are SOSO. But do you know who we are?" He slapped the table and shouted, then waved his hand in the air. Sword. Out of nowhere, a 2-finger-wide fine steel sword pierced through the air, and landed in his hand with a snap. Qi Songzi also stood up silently, and a steel sword appeared in his hand. The three of them were sitting around the table. At this moment, 2 swords were placed in front of Li Yunxin, blocking his way out. But when Qi Songzi stood up, he also slapped the table and suddenly stood up. Without showing any weakness, he shouted, "You want to know what's in my hand? Well, okay, I'll tell you, the treasure in my hand, listen carefully. It's the secret book of painting, the translucent jade scroll. You too want this? Well, you want this? Okay, kill me and take it. If you take it, as long as the news leaks out, let's see if you can swallow it or not. Ordinary people can't bear it. Can you bear this thing?" When Qi Songzi and Kong Songzi heard the words translucent jade scroll, their eyes suddenly widened, and they were stunned for a moment. That Lao Dao from the grotto heaven only said that it was the 10,000 miles of mountains and river painting left by a Taoist priest 1,000 years ago. Chapter 8. After saying so much before, Li Yunqin only needed this moment. Two hotheads. Perhaps they were two extremely powerful and rash youths. But he wasn't a 14-year-old boy, and his parents in this world weren't the defected disciples of the true martial sect, who only knew how to make talismans. They were more likely to be worshipped by the big sects like those two said, Taoist Danqing. At this moment, the cloud pattern originally painted on the corner of the wooden table quietly flowed out. Although it was said to be flowing, it was extremely fast. When the two Taoists blinked, they found themselves entangled by the wisps of cloud and mist. Qi Songzi frowned, and was about to disperse the cloud and mist to restrain Li Yunqin. But when he moved, he was even more shocked. The spiritual energy in his Qi Si had unexpectedly become as ethereal as the cloud and mist, unable to condense into Qi. And Li Yunqin had already leaped out and fiercely stamped his feet on the ground. The two Taoists didn't know what else he planned to do, but they already realized that they seemed to have made a mistake this time. It seemed that the Taoist from the heavenly cave, whom they had planned to kill, wasn't completely defenseless against the two of them. At least half of what he said was nonsense. What I have observed him for more than a month, I already knew that he was just an ignorant child. It's laughable that Li Chunfeng and his wife had some real skills. They actually wanted to conceal their identity there, not even passing on their skills to their only son. If it wasn't for that lightning tribulation that exposed our whereabouts, hee. Today, looking at this young man, he had a deep mind and knew when to advance and when to retreat. How was he an ignorant child? Anxious and shocked, they immediately bit the tip of their tongue and spat a mouthful of blood on the sword. The long sword immediately buzzed and vibrated, and in a breath's time, the cloud and mist that entangled the body dispersed. But after the cloud and mist dispersed, the spiritual energy in the body still couldn't condense into Qi. The two didn't know what kind of strange spell this was. They only knew that now they could only rely on their worldly martial arts to capture this young man. But when she took another step forward, the scenery in the courtyard changed. The sky suddenly darkened, and the wind and clouds changed color. Even the tree in the courtyard began to move its branches and leaves, as if a big ghost had suddenly come to life. This happened 7 days ago. This is the beginning. From that day onwards, Li Yunqin finally left the small mountain village where he had lived for 14 years and truly set foot on the world. But it was not the high-spirited, splendid, fantastic journey he had imagined. Now he was leaning against the tree, exhausted, waiting to gather some strength so that he could leave this place as soon as possible. Previously, during the chase, two Taoist priests had used a talisman to seal his sea of Qi. That chase had turned from a fight between cultivators into a fight between three ordinary people. If it wasn't for the fact that his sea of energy was still sealed, he wouldn't have needed to be afraid of the 5 servants risking their lives to lure the 9th young master here. When a few torches were faintly lit in the distance, and voices could be heard, Li Yunqin reluctantly stood up from the ground. First, he searched the bodies and found a dozen copper coins, a few pieces of silver, and a tael of silver ingot. Then he stumbled down the river. *****, weeping willows, white sand, beautiful scenery in spring. A group of people was walking along the river. 2 warriors on horseback led the way, followed by 4 young men with knives. Behind them were 3 large carriages with deep ruts, presumably carrying a lot of goods. There were also people on the 3 carriages, But the most eye-catching one was probably the girl in the last carriage. The girl was in her teens, wearing a short black dress. Her hair was tied into a ponytail, and a few strands of hair hung down from her forehead. It was the look of a girl from the martial world. At this moment, the girl broke a willow branch in her hand and looked left and right in boredom. Her bright eyes were lively, but her cherry lips were slightly pouting, obviously not very happy, because they had been on the road for 3 days. Although the scenery was good, there were few people. Occasionally, they could see a wisp of smoke rising from a valley in the distance, which was also something to see. In fact, the girl Xiao Jiesin was a little regretful. She should not have pestered her father to come out to escort the goods. If she had stayed at home, she would probably be fishing in the water now. She would have found some transparent small fish and shrimp in the crock, and watched them swim around every day. She twirled the willow branch in her hand for a while, stretched out her hand to block the sunlight from the east, tilted her leg, and turned to speak to a middle-aged man in a shabby Taoist robe on the other side of the carriage. "Hey, old Lu, play a trick." The old man in the Taoist robe frowned. "I am not a martial artist, I am a painter. Magic tricks." Xiao Jiesin curled her lips. "When I was in Hun City a few days ago, I saw you pulling a woman in an alley and playing tricks for her. You drew a piece of paper and burned it with a wave of your hand. As a result, you scared her away." The Taoist blushed and quickly interrupted her. "Don't talk nonsense. How can I do that kind of thing? You must have seen it wrong. You must have seen it wrong." The coachman in the front laughed and turned to tease Lao Dao. "I believe Jiesin. I also saw you enter the Jadeite house." Lao Dao's face turned blue again. I am the head of the Dongxian sect. How can I go to that kind of place?" The girl giggled again. I know the Dongxian sect. Your Dongxian sect only has you." She was talking happily, but the carriage suddenly stopped. She looked forward and heard her father Qiao Duanhong, who was riding on the horse, said in a low voice, "Who are you?" Xiao Jiesin's heart was thumping wildly. Was she being robbed? Was she being robbed? She quickly jumped out of the carriage and stretched her head to look, but only saw a teenager. A teenager dressed in green looked like a scholar, but there was a short knife hanging on his waist, which was a little strange. The teenager was standing on the side of the road, looking at them curiously. He even stretched out his hand and gave them a thumbs up, but no one knew what he meant. Xiao Jiesin was stunned for a moment, and her face slightly reddened, because she thought that the teenager was really good-looking. He was not like the people in the escort agency, whose skin was slightly dark and red because they lived in the open all year round. The teenager's skin was very white, and even looked a little transparent under the sunlight. His clothes stuck to his body, and his whole body was slender, as if a gust of wind would sway. Ba, what nonsense. At this time, the teenager scratched his head and smiled embarrassedly. "That are you guys escorting goods?" Xiao Duanhong's eyes lingered on the short knife hanging on his waist for a moment, and then carefully looked at him. "Wei City's Hongfu Escort Agency. Yes, we are escorting goods." The teenager seemed to be relieved, and raised his hand to salute. "It's an honor to meet you, nice to meet you. I'm Li Yunxin, and I'm going to City of Wei. Can I hitch a ride with you?" Xiao Jiesin couldn't help laughing. Although it was her first time escorting goods, she was used to seeing Jianghu people at home, so she could immediately see that this teenager, was a virgin. Of course, this was what her uncles called him. Every time they talked about those young masters who ran in front of them and pretended to be Jianghu people, she would also laugh. As for the word hitch, it was the first time she heard it, but she roughly knew what it meant. Of course, it was dangerous for a person to travel alone in the wild. Even if he didn't meet bandits, there would be jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards. That old Taoist surnamed Lu was a hitchhiker. Qiao Duanhong slightly frowned and hesitated for a moment. In fact, he was a little worried that this teenager was a spy. Generally speaking, large groups of bandits would send out spies to blend in with the convoy before doing anything, or they would use sleeping gas or laxatives. After the deed was done, they would send out a secret signal, and a group of people would come from somewhere. Of course, this was just hearsay. In fact, Hongfu Escort Agency only traveled from city of Luo to city of Hun. Although they had been in danger for more than 10 years, they had never encountered that kind of situation. After all, this area was the hinterland of the Daqing state, and there was no place for large groups of bandits. After thinking for a while, Qiao Duanhong slowed down and said, "I'm Qiao Duanhong. I can hitch a ride with you." But he felt that this teenager was either a spy of bandits or a young master who sneaked out to have fun. Looking at his long and slender hands, it was obvious that he wasn't someone who built up his strength. His clothes were not luxurious, but he didn't look like someone from a poor family. He also looked relaxed and casual, so he probably had seen a lot of the world. If he was a child from a poor family, most of them would only be yes men and wouldn't have such a bearing. So he had to ask, hitching a ride costs money. He was afraid that this young master didn't understand. Unexpectedly, the teenager didn't wait for him to finish and took out a tael of silver from his sleeve and threw it to Qiao Duanhong. I understand. Is this enough?" Oh, he was generous. A tael of silver was enough for a middle-class family in the countryside to live for a month. At this time, Qiao Duanhong was more and more relieved. He grabbed the tael of silver and put it in his pocket. "It's enough. Young Master Li, go to the back, choose a car." Li Yunxing cupped his hands and smiled, then walked over. Qiao Jiesin had already jumped back into the car and looked at him curiously. People in Jianghu were full of ups and downs, and the people who came and went in her house were all martial artists, so she didn't have the rules of a noble family. Usually, when she looked at teenagers of the same age like this, the thin-skinned ones would blush, and the calmer ones would look embarrassed. After all, she was a beautiful girl, and teenagers were at the age when they were most sensitive to certain emotions. But this one was different. He didn't blush, and he didn't look embarrassed. Instead, he looked at them with interest, as if it was something new. That was true. He had lived in a small mountain village for 14 years, and this was the first time he came out. Of course, he was more curious about the larger ancient world, the different world, and what kind of people and customs there were. When his eyes met Qiao Jiesin's eyes, he even smiled and nodded. Qiao Jiesin softly exclaimed in her heart, and subconsciously lowered her head. But then she realized that her shyness was even more embarrassing, so she raised her head again. But the teenager had already jumped into the car. Qiao Jiesin felt the car sink slightly. He sat next to Lu Laodao. She felt a little lucky, but also a little disappointed. Chapter 9. The caravan continued to move forward. Qiao Jiesin sat up straight in the car. Soon she felt uncomfortable under the sun, so she moved her body slightly and secretly glanced at him. She felt that this young man was quite interesting. Maybe the journey wouldn't be so boring anymore. Then on the other side of the car, two other people started to talk. At first, Lu Laodao didn't pay much attention to this young man, but after exchanging a few polite words, he felt much better. He was a painter. In fact, he was one of the better ones. There was a small temple in Weicheng that worshipped the Wei River Dragon King. The incense wasn't very popular, but it could barely make up for his food and clothing. Occasionally, people would come to ask for a painting. If they were lucky, they could sell it for a few taels of silver. In his early years, he had a master. It was said that he learned some breathing techniques from the Black Cave sect. Of course, it was the Black Cave sect of the 72 sects, from a disciple in green who was stationed in Willow City. So his master also called himself a disciple of the Dongxian sect. This kind of thing wasn't uncommon in Jianghu. Cultivators and immortals didn't care. In fact, if one really wanted to compare the names, the unorthodox sects and unorthodox sects in Jianghu would have this kind of name. Anyway, cultivators and immortals didn't care about these things. They were all busy seeking immortality. Besides, there were only so many good and impressive names. There was no reason not to let others use them. So Lu Laodao called himself the leader of the Dongxian sect. Of course, his Dongxian sect was just a small temple. Although this noble identity wasn't very popular in Luo City, it was still enough to scare people and earn a surprised look. But the people from the Hongfu escort agency were also from Luo City. They already knew his background. Thus, along the way, no one respected him, the dignified sect leader. Whenever they were bored, they would come to mock him. Ahem, everyone loved beauty. It was normal for Lu Laodao to love beauty. Now that this young man came over, he was the only one who was willing to talk to him. So Lu Laodao had a good impression of him. When he put on airs, he looked like an otherworldly master. In that case, little friend, you must have done some research on the Tao of painting. I know a little. You are the senior expert. I am not talented, but after 36 years of teaching, I can be considered to have gained some insight. In Luoyang City, there are probably less than a handful of people who have cultivated to the state of consciousness. I is one of them. It sounds very powerful. What is an artistic conception? Secular people also paint. Painters also paint. What's the difference? That was because painters also cultivated the profound sex orthodox techniques. Those who cultivate the proper dharma, gather spiritual energy, and cultivate to the point where they can mobilize the spiritual energy of heaven and earth with their thoughts, are different from those of the secular world. This is the concept of intent. In fact, Li Yunqi knew all of this. Although his parents did not tell him much, they had mentioned the 5 realms of profound truth void transformation. It was hard to imagine what kind of thoughts they had in the past. On one hand, they taught him to cultivate his body and qi, but on the other hand, they were afraid that he would know more. Probably at that time, they were also conflicted. Should they let their only son learn these things? Just like how people who practice martial arts could easily solve problems with their fists and attract trouble, they were probably also afraid that their son would learn well and not be able to stay in the mountain village. But although he did not know what level of cultivation they had, one thing was certain: no one would be willing to let their skills be buried. Perhaps it was because of this conflicted feeling that they had not decided how much to let him know. Unfortunately, it would probably be very difficult for them to have another chance. Just like what Lu Laodao had said, the state of consciousness could mobilize the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It sounded great, but according to what Li Yunqi knew, it was useless. At least for painters. Painters in this realm could integrate spiritual energy into their paintings. Those paintings that could calm the heart and calm the house were all like this. Some small uses were better than nothing. Perhaps experts in the state of consciousness could do better. After all, there was a difference between looking at it makes one feel somewhat comfortable, and looking at it makes one feel completely comfortable. But looking at Lu Laodao's clothes, he probably did not belong to the ranks of experts. It would be better when he reached the state of emptiness. At least he could shake the painting and create some illusion to scare people. The move he used to scare Constable Xing was the ability of this realm. When he reached the state of the outer fringe, it was no longer an illusion. He could actually summon something, but it would not last long. The reason why he asked Lu Laodao about this was because after these days of traveling, he realized that the painters in the secular world seemed to be different from the painters his parents spoke of. Yes, they were a little weak. Or rather, they were not just a little weak. Sometimes, Li Yunqi even suspected that his parents had made a mistake. Therefore, he wanted to find out how weak these people were. After listening to Lu Laodao's long-winded and respectful explanation of the 5 realms, mostly using the words "it is said," and perhaps, with many mistakes, he realized that Qi Songzi was right. The art of painting had really declined. Luo City was considered a big city. There were 5 painters of artistic conception. Even though Lu Laodao managed to occupy a spot, there were still only 5 painters. As for the state of emptiness, according to Lu Laodao, it could only be seen in the capital city. Only high officials and nobles could see it. When they reached the state of the outer fringe, according to him, who knows if there is? Although painters are no longer people of the secular world, perhaps some of the predecessors also applied the 5 realms of Qinzhou and Daotong, hoping that one day there will be such a connoisseur among our generation. Sigh. I am ashamed. It turned out that what Qi Songzi told him, what his parents told him, was not known by everyone. Perhaps there was an inside story to the decline of the art of painting. Otherwise, it would not be like this, as if the history of the past had been erased from the secular world. However, Lu Laodao felt that Li Yunqi was a person who pursued Tao with all his heart. Seeing that he listened to him so patiently, Lu Laodao's love for talent grew in him. Therefore, he began to beat around the bush. Young friend, are you from Luo City? Where do you live? Li Yunqing pretended to sigh. It's a long story. My family has met with some unforeseen events, and now I am alone. I can be considered to have no parents. Xiao Jiesin listened attentively. She felt a little sad when she heard this, but she also felt slightly relieved. Lu Laodao was delighted, but his expression did not change. Oh, then, what are your plans when you go to Luo City? Li Yunqing shook his head. Tell me as I go. Oh, my Taoist temple of the Dongxian sect is a peaceful place. Lu Laodao stroked his beard. Master, your cultivation base is profound. Naturally, it is a blessed place. Xiao Jiesin was a little anxious. She felt that the good-looking young man probably did not know what kind of place Lu Laodao's Taoist temple of the Dongxian sect was, and might be tricked into going there. Actually, the house was spacious. Her father always said that he did not have enough manpower and wanted to recruit more people. Lu Laodao was also a little anxious. The young man was smart, respectful, and devoted to Taoism. How could he not understand the meaning of his question? Xiao Jiesin could not help but want to expose Lu Laodao's background. But Lu Laodao was already on guard. He was afraid that when he spoke to the young man, the people from the escort agency would laugh at him again. Seeing Xiao Jiesin's eager look, he simply shouted, "Hey, idiot! Haven't you understood? Do you want to seek Taoism?" Such a shout shocked Xiao Jiesin and Xiao Sifu, who was driving. After drinking it, Lu Laodao felt proud. He felt that the words he shouted out in the nick of time. He had the demeanor of a master. Li Yunqing also seemed to be shocked. But after a moment of surprise, his face lit up. Can I really? Then, sitting in the car, he raised his hand and bowed deeply. Master, please accept a bow from your disciple. Xiao Jiesin and Xiao Sifu were stunned. Laodao was proud. He stroked his beard for a while, and quickly pulled Li Yunqing's hand. He was afraid that his disciple would go back on his words. This young man admired and respected him, and his words were pleasant to hear. Most importantly, he was good-looking. In the future, when he went out, he would be able to make a scene. At least he would earn more money. Chapter 10. Li Yunqing heaved a sigh of relief. Well, the problem of where to stay was solved. The 2 Taoist priests who chased him were dead. The 5 servants who saw him were dead. Maybe someone was looking for him, and the translucent jade slip. But since his parents had been living in seclusion for so many years, it was not easy to find him. Then he would go to a big city with a lot of people. There was no internet and no news broadcast. In this era, where could he find him? He had to figure out what the translucent jade slip was. And then he could get rid of the shackles in his ocean of Reiki. Then, he could investigate some things. He could accept running away for a while. But how could he be worthy of this second life, if he had to be restrained for the rest of his life? Xiao Sifu, who was driving the car, laughed. Ha ha ha, little brother, let me tell you. Xiao Jiesin knew what he was going to say. He was going to say what kind of person Lu Laodao was. But she was a smart girl, and was afraid that Li Yunqing would be embarrassed and annoyed if he knew the inside story. So she hurriedly said, "Fourth brother, why do you care so much?" Xiao Jiesin was fearless in the escort agency. Xiao Sifu was slightly stunned by her words, and then seemed to understand something. He winked at Jiesin, smiled, and turned to drive the car. Jiesin blushed and looked at the young man, but found that Li Yunqing was smiling and nodding at her. He hurriedly turned his head away as if he was possessed. What the hell? Miss Qiao thought, what's wrong with me? In fact, she wanted to tell Li Yunqing secretly at night when they settled down. That way, the young man wouldn't be too embarrassed. She thought of this good-looking young man's gentle and calm appearance, and she didn't want to see him embarrassed. So the convoy traveled for another half a day. When the sun began to set, they stopped to make a fire and cook. The road from Hun City to Luo City had always been peaceful, so there was no need to rush. Xiao Duanhong was always kind and generous to his family, and he ate 3 meals a day when he was outside. At this time, they set up camp on a gentle slope. The grass was like a carpet, and the stream was clear and slow. It made people feel as if the fatigue of the day had been swept away. Xiao Jiesin kept glancing at Li Yunxin, trying to find a chance to talk to him. However, Lu Laodao acted as if he had picked up a treasure and was afraid that it would be snatched away. He pulled Li Yunxin aside and told him about his family's affairs. Unexpectedly, Li Yunxin listened with great interest. The more Lao Dao felt that this cheap disciple of his was respectful and well-behaved, the more Big Miss Qiao felt that this good-looking youth was going to be cheated miserably. Qiao Sifu slowly walked to Qiao Jiesin's side and winked. "Hey look, you're so good-looking, but you're so stupid." Qiao Jiesin glared at him. "You're the stupid one." Qiao Sifu smirked. After waiting for another quarter of an hour, Big Miss Qiao saw that the youth took the gourd on Lu Laodao's waist and walked to the river behind the slope to fetch water. She thought for a moment and blushed. She immediately kicked the grass in front of her and followed him, swaying left and right with her hands behind her back. The youth was half squatting by the river to fetch water. Under the slanting sunlight, his hair was slightly red. Qiao Jiesin looked behind her. Qiao Sifu had been called by her father to tie a rope for another cart. Her heart calmed down. When she looked at the youth again, she suddenly felt a strange sense of tranquility in her heart. It was as if they were the only two people left in this small world. The slanting sun was very warm, the grass was very green, the water was very slow, and the wind was very light. The 14-year-old girl was surprised by this sudden feeling that made her happy, but also a little confused and nervous. She didn't know that this feeling was called falling in love with someone. The first awakening of love. Her heart jumped like a little deer. She didn't know how to walk over and how to open her mouth. She stared at the youth's figure for a while until he turned around and closed the mouth of the gourd and raised his head. Only then did she let out a soft cry in her heart. The youth was slightly surprised and smiled at her. "Miss, did you also come to fetch water?" Jiesin found that the youth was calm and didn't have a trace of panic. Her heart suddenly calmed down. Of course, Li Yunxin wouldn't panic because of this kind of thing. In his eyes, this girl was still a young girl. She had a slender body and a beautiful face. She was like a beautiful girl next door. He had seen this kind of thing a lot. In the past, he wasn't that kind of person who was unpopular. Qiao Jiesin hesitated for a moment and said, "Well, I just came to tell you one thing. In any case, I saw that you didn't seem to understand anything, so I came to tell you. Don't believe Lu Laodao's words. He isn't some sect leader, he is." Speaking up to this point, she suddenly felt that it wasn't good to speak ill of others behind their backs. So, she pursed her lips and puffed out her chest. In any case, I dared to say these things in front of him. I just don't want you to feel embarrassed. Actually, you don't have to follow him. If you don't have a place to go, my family. Actually, my family's escort agency isn't small. My family's escort agency is also lacking people. Well, I just feel sorry for you. That's why I'm telling you. Li Yunxin smiled warmly. Yes, that's good. Thank you. Jiesin was stunned for a moment. I told you so much. I'm telling the truth. Li Yunxin smiled again. Well, I know. Thank you. But my body isn't very good. I don't think I can handle being escorted like you guys. In fact, I often get sick. So thank you. Qiao Jiesin was a little disappointed for a moment. But then she told herself, she was a member of the pugilistic world. Forget it. In fact, looking at his appearance, he really wasn't strong or tanned. It seemed like he really couldn't fight. The youngster cupped his hands toward her and took 2 steps away. Qiao Jiesin suddenly felt that he looked a little strange, not the same as before. Back then, he was strange and frivolous when he blocked her way. But now this person was calm and steady. He didn't look like the other impatient boys she had met before. However, after taking 2 steps, Li Yunxin suddenly raised his head and looked at Jiesin. His eyebrows furrowed, and his eyes turned cold in an instant, which really startled Qiao Jiesin. Just as she was about to ask what's wrong, she heard footsteps coming from behind. A man wearing a greenish-gray Taoist robe walked over with a sword in his right hand. Li Yunxin recognized that sword. It was the same sword that Qi Songzi and Kong Kurako used to wield. Just as Qiao Jiesin was about to speak, the sword-bearing man said coldly, "Ha! There are 2 little guys. Let's go. Follow me." His identity was unknown, but his tone was not friendly. Even Xiao Jiesin knew that this guy was not a good person. She took a step back and stood in front of Li Yunxin. Her gentle and slightly arrogant tone was gone. She became alert and vigilant. Who are you? In fact, she had a small thin sword in her sleeve. But her father, Qiao Duanhong, often told her that they were escorts, not Jianghu people. She would not fight if she could avoid it. If she could solve the problem by lowering her head, she would not draw her sword. Therefore, Xiao Jiesin only held the small sword in her hand and did not draw it. The sword-bearing man frowned and snorted. You refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. As soon as he finished speaking, he thrust his rapier forward and pounced forward. Li Yunxin felt that this person's skills were probably not too high. At least he was weaker than the two Taoist priests who had their spiritual power sealed, and could only use secular martial arts to kill him. His father once told him to practice a martial art called water cloud force. He said that this martial art was not bad, because it cultivated both the body and the spirit. It was most suitable for young people to strengthen their body and build their foundation. He practiced it for 8 or 9 years. Because of this, he could fight with the two Taoist priests for 3 days and 3 nights without being killed. By now, in his eyes, he felt that he could have beaten this fellow in the past. Unfortunately, he used the formation left by his parents to seal the spiritual power of the two Taoist priests. After that, the two Taoist priests burned a talisman to seal his Sea of Qi. His spiritual power was hidden in his Sea of Qi, so he could only watch at this moment. If it was a real fight, the body of a 14-year-old boy, without spiritual power to activate the hidden force, how could he be a match for an adult? His eyes were fast, but his body was not. When he reacted and wanted to block it, the sword-bearing man's thin sword had already hit Xiao Jiesin's right sleeve. With a ding sound, the small sword in her hand was knocked off. At this time, the girl cried out and wanted to dodge. But Li Yunxin had already held her shoulder from behind and pulled her behind him. The sword-bearing man frowned again. Don't think that I don't dare to hurt you. Hero, you misunderstood. Li Yunxin interrupted him and spread out his hands. Your martial art is good, we admit defeat. Hey! The man and Xiao Jiesin were stunned. After a while, the girl cried out in disappointment. Why did you? In her mind, even if this boy couldn't be beaten, at least, he should have some backbone, right? What's going on? The man looked at Li Yunxin again and sneered. Oh, you're smart. Let's go. He swung the rapier and held it in his hand. Then, he walked toward the gentle slope, as if he didn't care that the two teenagers would run away. Li Yunxin followed. Xiao Jiesin reached out and pulled his sleeve. You. Li Yunxin shook his head and said in a low voice. Look at the slope. In fact, the two of them were some distance away from the camp. The girl didn't hear the sound from the slope because of her shock and panic, but Li Yunxin heard it. He realized that there were still people over there. The sword-bearing man had an accomplice. Now it was quiet over there. There were no fierce fighting sounds. When they were setting up camp to cook, they had been talking. Later, when a few unfamiliar voices mixed in, the conversation quieted down. Now it was quiet. Li Yunxin thought that the other party had probably used some amazing means to intimidate the escorts. When the two of them walked up the slope, the girl saw the situation over there. 5 men in coarse Taoist robes surrounded the people of the escort agency. The escorts originally had long and short weapons, but at this moment, their weapons fell on the grass beside them, and no one dared to pick them up. Chapter 11. The man with the sword turned to look at the two teenagers and pointed to the foot of the hill. Stand there. So Li Yunxin and Xiao Jiesin slowly walked over, facing the various gazes of the people in the escort agency. In fact, for a moment, Li Yunxin wanted to summon the 9th young master again like last time. But he knew that the 9th young master was a temperamental demon. He definitely wouldn't like people to disturb him all the time. He had narrowly escaped death the previous 2 times. But he wasn't sure if the 9th young master would find him boring this time and eat him as well. But even if he let him go this time, at least the girl beside him, Xiao Jiesin, Li Yunxin didn't hate her. In fact, he even liked her a little. No one would hate someone who liked them for no reason. They might also be killed by the ninth young master. Of course, there was another more important reason. The swords in their hands were surprisingly similar to the swords in the hands of the two Taoist priests. Although the weapons of the Daqing state always had a fixed shape, their swords were special. The ridge of the sword was very thin, almost invisible. The body of the sword was like a flat piece of iron. Although this kind of weapon was much lighter, it was much less sturdy. It was a typical case of losing more than the gain. Li Yunqin thought that these people probably had some kind of subtle connection with the two Taoist priests. He wanted to try to find some clues. Moreover, the sword-bearers didn't act like they wanted to kill him at first. They also didn't show any special attention to him, so he could wait and see for now. When the two groups met, the 6 sword-bearers wearing Taoist robes began to give orders. It was strange that they wanted the people of the escort agency to burn the carriages and the red goods. So the escorts became restless. It was normal for the escorts to meet strong people. Generally speaking, the escorts in Jianghu were popular both in the underworld and in the underworld. If they passed by a mountain and offered a gift, the leader wouldn't be too embarrassed. There were so many escort agencies in Jianghu, and there were so many strong people. If they met him, they would kill him and rob him. The rules would be messed up, and no one would dare to do business. Moreover, the government might even encircle and suppress him. Occasionally, there would be people who didn't follow the rules and intended to leave after making a quick buck. Their goal was probably to get some pretty goods. No one liked to kill people. Not only would he have to pay with his life, but he might also have to go to court and be beheaded if he was caught. Thus, the 6 strongmen's demands became inconceivable. They didn't want the goods. Qiao Sifu stood beside Qiao Duanhong and said in a low voice, "Uncle, this is strange. I say, should we?" As he spoke, he glanced at the saber that had fallen by his feet. Qiao Duanhong gritted his teeth and sighed, shaking his head slightly. "I'm not his match." Strange. These people's martial arts were extremely high. From the moment the 5 of them appeared on the side of the road, fought, and were forced to remain motionless, only 3 breaths of time had passed. They didn't even have time to send out a warning. Although the thin swords in their hands were only weapons, Qiao Duanhong knew that if they really had the intention to kill, everyone in the escort agency would have a bloody hole in their throat and would be lying on the ground. In Jianghu, these 6 people could already be considered second-rate experts. In any small gang, they would all be hall masters or incense masters. Why would they gather together to do this kind of thing? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but glance at Li Yunqin. Everyone else in the convoy was well aware of their background. Only this youth's background was unknown. But he immediately dispelled this thought. When the youth walked over, the 6 strongmen didn't have any particular reaction. After so many years of escorting, this was the first time Qiao Duanhong was completely at a loss. In the end, he sighed and steeled his heart. Burn. It wasn't that they didn't have courage, but that they were afraid of death. Who wasn't afraid of death? Especially since most of these people were related to each other. He himself could probably contend with one of them. And if he was lucky, he could even escape. But with so many people, if they fought, not a single one of them would be able to escape. It would be a situation of certain death. After saying this, Qiao Duanhong took a step forward. "I am Qiao Duanhong of Luoqing's Hongfu Escort Agency. Friends of Jianghu think highly of me and call me Water-Dispelling Saber. Friends, we admit defeat at the opening ceremony today. If this thing wants to be burned, then so be it. But friends, if you want to find something, you can say it clearly. If I can be of any help." "Shut up," a sword-wielding man with high cheekbones and narrow eyes said. "If you say another word, you'll die." Qiao Duanhong's face immediately turned red, and he almost rushed forward. In all his years of escorting, this was the first time he had received such treatment. But in the end, he suppressed the anger that rushed to his heart, cupped his hands and said no more. "Burn." Qiao Duanhong repeated himself, and glared fiercely at the man. But the man only revealed a fleeting sneer at the corner of his mouth. Li Yunqin's heart skipped a beat. The man wanted to kill. No matter how good a person's disguise was, there would always be some subtle expressions that would faithfully reflect their inner thoughts. He looked at the man with high cheekbones and narrow eyes, and realized that although he looked cold and calm, the way he looked at these people was indeed as if he was looking at dead people. That man felt that they would die sooner or later. This was one of the skills that he had relied on to make a living in his previous life. Not to say that he had reached the point of perfection, but in this world, there was probably no one who could match him. In the end, the fire still burned. Then, the 6 sword-wielding men herded the dozen people in the convoy together, and they walked towards the wilderness by the side of the road. Li Yunxin walked in the middle of the group, and beside him was Lu Laodao. At this time, the old Taoist was a little panicked. He kept muttering nonstop. He was probably saying why he was so unlucky to be on this bus. Xiao Sifu listened for a while, and couldn't help but turn around and glare at him. What are you talking about? Didn't you say that you're the leader of the Black Cave sect? You don't even dare to fart at this time. Lu Laodao sighed and ignored him. He was probably really worried about his own life, so he didn't have the mood to care about him. Xiao Sifu scolded angrily, and then glared at Li Yunxin. Embroidered pillow. A man can't protect my little sister. I'm your woman, and I'm going to risk my life to protect her. Bah! Li Yunxin smiled. Yes. His attitude made Xiao Sifu even more angry, but he didn't know what to say. He could only spit again, and turned his head away. Xiao Jiesin, who was beside Xiao Sifu, glanced at Li Yunxin, and also turned her head away. Actually, the girl was a little disappointed. She knew that this young man looked like a scholar, and his body was frail and weak, but how come he didn't have a heart? She felt that if Li Yunxin had argued with her 4th brother, she would have felt much better. The 6 people who were hurting them did not interfere with their conversation, and only maintained their arrogant expressions, like a few dignified shepherds. Xiao Duanhong lowered his voice, so that the few people beside him could hear him. Depends on the situation. If the situation isn't right, we can't just wait to be slaughtered. He glanced at his daughter, Xiao Jiesin, and gritted his teeth. If they make a move, then listen to me and fight for your life. Xiao Jiesin also pursed her lips and nodded. They walked for a full hour. They went deep into the forest, and the surrounding trees grew taller and taller. In the end, the canopy of the trees blocked out the sun, and the sky turned dark early. The more they walked, the more panicked they became. When Xiao Duanhong could not bear it any longer, and wanted to see if he could risk his life and break out with a few people, the swordsman with high cheekbones and narrow eyes said in a deep voice, "Stay. Take a break for now." This sentence was a bit strange, but everyone knew what it meant. Li Yunxin frowned slightly, and felt that he seemed to have thought of something. The word stay should not be used here. It should be stop. The word take a break for now was not bad, but he was being too polite to say that to this group of captives. Li Yunxin could see that after the man said that, he seemed to be somewhat pleased with himself. This was a feeling that he probably did not feel. These few fellows in the words of his era, they wanted to show off. Or perhaps they wanted to act cool. Thus, they did not intend to speak properly, and wanted to use words. Unfortunately, their standards were limited, so they were neither fish nor fowl. As the only calm observer among the group of captives, Li Yunxin felt that he had grasped some clues. These 6 people were now proud of their status, but they could not very well adapt to their current roles. This meant that the reason or condition that made them proud had only recently appeared. In fact, there were some clues. The 6 people chased them away with a straight face, and all along, they wanted to act as if they were not interested in them, as if they saw them as ants. But their eyes betrayed them. When they saw the internal strife among the captives, there were actually a few of them who appeared to be gloating. This was not the performance that a heart as still as water should have. They even wore Taoist robes. In Li Yunxin's understanding of this world, if there was a force that could make the strong people of Jianghu revere, and even deliberately imitate it, it was probably Daotong and Kenzo. He felt that he had guessed correctly. These 6 people might really have some connection with the 2 Taoist priests. No one knew that one sentence had made the youth come up with so many inferences. They were all trying to come up with their own conclusions. When the 6 people said that they wanted to rest, Xiao Duanhong waved his hand. Rest for a while. No matter what, he was still the backbone of this escort agency. He tried to make himself look calmer and more at ease. He thought that this way, the 6 people might understand his role and weight, and perhaps they could have a good talk later. The sky was slowly darkening, and a light breeze was blowing through the forest. After a quarter of an hour, they built 2 bonfires. The people of the escort agency were gathered under a towering ancient tree. The 6 powerhouses were a little further away from them, and were also sitting around the fire. Occasionally, they would converse and occasionally glance at the captives with cold, disdainful eyes. It was as if they were looking at pigs and dogs. They seemed to be waiting for something. Chapter 12. Uncle, there's a chance. Xiao Sifu leaned against Xiao Duanhong and glanced at the 6 men in Taoist robes. The sky was dark and the trees blocked out the sun. If they split up, perhaps some of them could escape. Xiao Duanhong shook his head gloomily. Let's wait a little longer. I left something behind along the way. Xiao Sifu looked at him with a strange expression. Incense to guide the way? Yes. Xiao Sifu didn't say anything. But another escort sighed slightly. Escort leader, we can't count on that. Probably every escort agency had incense to guide the way. It was something like sawdust. When scattered through the gaps of one's fingers, it would give off a strange smell after an hour. The dragon head of the Escort Association said that every escort agency had the obligation to help each other. If they saw someone scatter incense to guide the way, they should know that they were in danger and help to the best of their ability. But the dragon head's intentions were good. Unfortunately, no one would really count on unrelated people to help at the risk of death or injury. They were all just trying to make a living. They weren't the kind of Jianghu heroes who could entrust their lives to each other. They probably don't want to hurt anyone for the time being, Xiao Duanhong said after some consideration. Their kung fu is unnaturally high. Let's wait a little longer. If they really start fighting, Xiao Sifu and the other escorts moved their lips but didn't say anything. How could they not know what Xiao Duanhong was worried about? If they fought now, they would probably die. Let's wait a little longer. People always believed in hope. Xiao Sifu turned to look at Xiao Jiesin. The girl stared at the bonfire in a daze and didn't say anything. Occasionally, she would glance at Li Yunxin, who was sitting further away from Lao Dao. He wanted to fight the 6 men, but he did not dare to do so. He didn't dare, but he was unwilling. Thus, he became even more irritated. He lowered his voice. I think there's something wrong with that kid. Jiesin said that when they saw that strong man, he was very calm. He looked like a fledgling when he tried to stop the car, but now he doesn't look like one at all. Xiao Duanhong followed his gaze and saw that Li Yunxin was looking at the 6 people, and then writing and drawing on the ground. He seemed to be bored to death, much more relaxed than they were. He shook his head. Probably a merchant family. That kind of child had seen a lot of things when they were young, so this kind of reaction was expected. She thought that everything in this world could be negotiated and changed, so she wasn't so afraid anymore. She was calm and composed. If it were an ordinary person, this would be a good idea. Seeing how generous he was, he probably had some family background. But looking at the current situation, the other party probably didn't want money. After all, this child is still young. Xiao Sifu pursed his lips and glanced at Li Yunxin. Even though he was reluctant, he felt that his uncle's words made sense. It wasn't like he hadn't seen that kind of thing before. The people in the escort agency had to go through many trials and tribulations before they could accomplish something. But when it came to the rich merchants in Luoyang City, they just needed to move their lips and spend money to settle it. He didn't like that kind of slickness and ease. So when he saw Li Yunxin throw out an ingot of silver, he didn't feel happy. Eldest Miss Chiao also looked at Li Yunxin faintly, but she felt that he wasn't the kind of person her father and 4th brother described. He clearly pulled her behind him at that time. Now that she thought about it, even if he didn't have any guts, he still knew how to protect her. Even her father couldn't do anything. So what could he do? But at this time, Li Yunxin suddenly stood up. The eyes of the people around the fire were focused on him, not knowing what this unknown youngster was planning to do. The next moment, they saw him striding towards the 6 people. Lu Laodao winked behind him, but he didn't dare to speak loudly. Xiao Jiesin widened her eyes, Stunned by his actions, Li Yunqin took 6 or 7 steps, and one of them shouted, "What are you doing? Stop." He hurriedly stopped and spread his hands. Okay, I won't go. The fire in the forest swayed, and the surroundings quieted down. Everyone's eyes fell on him. But this youngster really looked like a newborn calf. As if he didn't understand how strange the situation in front of him was in the eyes of an experienced person like Qiao Duanhong. "This one is Li Yunqin from Luocheng." He cupped his hands and said seriously, "Heroes, please listen to me first. I see that all of you are highly skilled in martial arts, and definitely not from the countryside. This time, you were forced to act, and only destroyed the goods, but didn't hurt anyone. This is already the model of a great hero. Yin Xian guessed that all of you are short of money, so you had no choice but to do this. Speaking of money, Yin Xian is quite rich recently. If you don't mind, I had great hero." A swordsman sneered, and turned to look at Li Yunqin. "You brat, aren't you afraid of death? This phrase is a bit interesting." Another person also looked at Li Yunqin with interest. "Did you think of it yourself?" At this time, the faces of these people finally showed some clear, vivid expressions. "I am ashamed. Although this one has traveled extensively with my father, I have also read some books. Great hero, for the country and the people. All of you are skilled in martial arts, but you are unknown in the Jianghu. You are definitely just temporarily lying low, waiting to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat, since we have this opportunity. So what if Yin Xian loses all of her wealth? Being acquainted with all of you in the countryside, I believe that in the future. Is there something wrong with that kid's head?" Xiao Sifu was dumbfounded. He felt that Li Yunqin was bullshitting. Even an idiot wouldn't think as he said. But now he said it so clearly and logically. What did he want to do? Did he think that those people would let him go like this? Qiao Duanhong frowned. This person? He thought for a moment, and looked at Li Yunqin again under the light of the fire. He didn't take this youth seriously before, but now he vaguely felt that there seemed to be some other meaning in his words that he couldn't understand. Qiao Jiesin looked at him in a daze, and felt that he was confused by him. Li Yunqin said a lot without changing his expression. Qiao Duanhong listened to him with a frown, and lightly shook his head. He knew what this youth was planning to do. For a youth in his teens to be able to remain so calm in such a situation, and even try to use such overflowing words to try and convince those 6 experts, it could be considered as quick-witted. That youth was trying to make himself appear brainless. He probably wouldn't believe what he said, and those experts definitely wouldn't believe it. But if the other side really felt that this youth wasn't a threat, and was greedy for his gold and silver, and because of the courage and slyness he displayed, they had a slightly favorable impression of him, then it was possible that they would let him go. Unfortunately, this youth couldn't see the situation clearly. These experts clearly weren't after money, but something else. Qiao Duanhong had thought for a long time, but he didn't know what they had on them that would make them go through so much trouble. Just as Qiao Duanhong expected, after listening for a while, the 6 people became annoyed and waved their hands. Scram, scram, scram. Go back and stay, don't be noisy. But Qiao Duanhong felt that there was an inexplicable change in the other side's tone. But when he thought about it carefully, he couldn't find any trace of it. Li Yunqin knew, even if they were scolding him, at least their tone wasn't so cold. It had a human quality to it. He came from another world, and had done that kind of job. He knew that under certain circumstances, people would be vexed and resentful. For example, wearing silk clothes at night. Or in other words, there was no one to support him when he was showing off. He smiled good-naturedly and didn't get angry. He clasped his hands and walked a few steps to the other side, smiling mischievously as he walked. Then, heroes, I still want to discuss something. I don't know that group of people over there, and we just got together. Can I find a place to stay by myself? This time, the swordsman with high cheekbones and narrow eyes finally became a little impatient. He snorted coldly. You want to die? Li Yunqin seemed to be startled. He hurriedly stepped back and waved his hand. Okay, I'll go back now. When he walked back to the fire dejectedly, dragging the dried branches and leaves on the ground, Xiao Sifu raised his eyebrows and looked at him with disdain. You're back already? He spat on the ground again. Aren't you not familiar with us? At this time, the people looking at him all had the same expression. In Jianghu, there were many things that could be seen from different people. But there was one thing that everyone agreed on: one must be loyal. What he did just now was understandable, but the last sentence that he said to disassociate himself from these people angered them. Even Xiao Jiesin finally sighed. She glanced at Li Yunxin, snorted and turned her head away. The feelings between a young man and a young woman often came suddenly and quickly, and when it faded, there was no deep affection to speak of. The young woman realized that the good-looking young man was only good-looking, so she felt that she had been happy for so long for nothing, and even felt a little cheated. But when Li Yunxin turned around, the expression on her face was no longer so dejected. He smiled and said, "Yes." Then he sat next to Lu Laodao. This attitude stunned the escorts by the fire. They wanted to say a few more words to him, but looking at him now, it was as if he had just run out to put on a show, and now he was going backstage. Even a veteran of Jianghu would not be able to change his expression as soon as he turned around. It was as if he was very familiar with speaking the language of a person and speaking the language of a ghost. But how old was he? Even the people sitting here might not be able to do it as smoothly as him. In order to survive, he really didn't care about his face anymore. They could only think like this. Chapter 13. Lu Laodao didn't really care what this cheap disciple of his had done. Right now he was busy chanting what to do like chanting a sutra. Li Yunxin leaned close to him and poked him lightly with his finger. "Master." Lu Laodao glanced at him with a distressed expression. "Hey disciple, I can't even take care of myself right now. If you have any other ideas. Do you know the embroidered clothes walking in the night painting?" "Ah. Embroidered clothes walking in the night." Xiangnu, the mighty emperor of the Great Chu, was defeated at Gaixia in his early years and lost his beloved wife. After 12 years of hard work, he led the army to break through the enemy's capital and conquered the world. Unfortunately, everyone he cared about at that time was already dead. He had no one to share his 1,000-year hegemony. So on a snowy night, he rode alone for 300 miles to Gaixia to pay his respects to his deceased wife. Later, a master painter painted this painting. You should know about it, right? Li Yunxin spoke very clearly, as if they were having a quiet chat by a clear stream on a sunny afternoon. But this kind of situation was too strange at this time. Lu Laodao stared at him blankly for a long time, before he opened his mouth. You, how did you know? I told you before that I quite like the profession of a painter with a bright future, so I know this painting is not a big deal. Now look over there. Yes, it's over there. Squint your eyes and use the firelight to look. Just now when I walked back, I left a mark with my foot. Lu Laodao was full of astonishment. He didn't understand how this young man suddenly became a different person at this moment. But he still subconsciously squinted his eyes in the direction that Li Yunxin quietly pointed at. Although he wasn't a cultivator with profound magic power, since he claimed to be one of the top 5 experts in Luo City's painting world, he still knew what he should know. So after looking for a while with the firelight, Lu Laodao slightly widened his eyes. He turned to look at Li Yunxin and stammered, This, who are you? Well, you all like to ask me who I am." Li Yunxin patted his arm, signaling him to relax. "But let's not talk about this for now. So you saw that I was painting the night walk in brocade clothes. But it was not finished yet. The night procession in brocade is a form of meticulous brushwork. I used a freehand brushwork method to draw out the charm of the painting." Yes. Lu Laodao snapped out of his daze and realized that he might have hit the jackpot. Of course, being kidnapped by 6 strong people wasn't considered a stroke of luck, but compared to this young man in front of him, it was simply insignificant. Painters were divided into meticulous brushwork and freehand brushwork. The meticulous brushwork was meticulous and exquisite, and the scenery in the painting was vivid and lifelike. Painting in a freehand style, the brush strokes flowing freely, the ink colors flying in the air, paying more attention to a lingering artistic conception. If it was a painting in the secular world, there was no difference between the meticulous brushwork and freehand brushwork. But for painters, a person could use a meticulous brushwork to make a beautiful woman look vivid and lifelike, but might not be able to use a freehand brushwork to show her charm. But this young man in front of him used a freehand brushwork to draw out the charm of that famous painting with just a few brushwork. Just by looking at these brushwork, one could feel the smoothness of the painting. The person who drew the brush used his spirit as a guide to plan the spiritual energy on the painting scroll. When the painting was completed, he would use the sea of chi within his body to guide the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into this trajectory. And a painting scroll that only a master of the artistic conception could draw would be completed. Lu Laodao was also fortunate enough to see a master's masterpiece once. Every stroke in that painting was very particular. Just like the talismans of Taoist priests, each stroke was used to guide the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into the painting scroll. It was said that a master of the artistic conception painting could make people feel nostalgic, but in fact, in essence, it was still something similar to a talisman made by the brush and ink. Whether you could do it well or not depended on your cultivation and skills. But this young man's few brushwork, Lu Laodao felt that it might be even more brilliant than the painting of the master he saw the other day. What kind of person was this? He hurriedly pulled Li Yunxin's hand. I had eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. I didn't take those words about taking disciples seriously. Young master, you're so young, but you're already so accomplished. I wonder if your family. Don't worry, listen to me. Li Yunxin gently pushed his hand away. There's something wrong with my body, so I can't do the finishing touch. The so-called finishing touch was the crucial stroke after the painting was completed. This stroke guided the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into the trajectory of the painting scroll. As for where and how to do it, only the painter himself knew. But Li Yunxin's sea of qi was sealed, so he couldn't do this last step. I can't do the finishing touch, so you do it. Li Yunxin pointed to another campfire, next to the swordsman with high cheekbones and thin eyebrows. Right there, it's missing one stroke. The sword of Emperor Wei lie in the painting. Lu Laodao opened his mouth and shrank his neck. Well, I say, master, my cultivation is low. Aren't you one of the 5 masters of the artistic conception in Luoyang City? Just kidding, just kidding. How can I be compared to you? Actually, it's enough. I'm afraid I'll ruin your big plan. I'm not afraid. Master, why do you make things difficult for me? Do you want to die? Li Yunxin stared at him and said. The two of them were originally hurrying to talk, but hearing this sentence, the rest of Lu Laodao's words were stuck in his throat. This is not a joke, and I'm not joking with you. They really want to kill. Li Yunxin's expression became serious, and his tone was no longer as relaxed as before. They're just waiting for someone or something. Once they decide to kill, no one here will be able to escape. I can't run and neither can you. So what you're doing now is to save yourself. If you succeed, you'll get the gratitude of those people over there. I don't know how your Black Cave sect is doing in Luoyang City, but I'm sure it won't be any better than them. So whether you want to save your own life and their favor depends on whether you go and do the finishing touch. Lu Laodao had lived for decades, but he had never experienced such a dangerous situation. Now that he saw this ordinary-looking young man turn into a mysterious person with profound cultivation, he felt his throat go dry and his legs go weak. The campfire crackled not far away, and further away, 6 swordsmen were discussing something in low voices, turning their heads to look at them from time to time. Master you, but how do I go? Lu Laodao felt a little cold, but he was sweating. He wiped his forehead. Besides this night walk in brocade painting, it doesn't seem to be of much use at this time. You'll know when the time comes. Li Yunxin patted his shoulder. Go. You'll have to go sooner or later. You know it yourself. Of course Lu Laodao knew. At his age, no matter how timid he was, he knew what was important and what wasn't. As long as he wasn't a hopeless coward, he would always reach out and grab hold of hope. And he felt that this young man was hiding something. Maybe he could solve the problem by himself, but he wanted to play. As he said this to himself, he stood up shakily. After taking 3 deep breaths, he was completely in the zone. This was the state he was in when he fooled the rich people in Luoyang City. The night wind blew, and his tattered robe fluttered. The 2 campfires dimmed slightly. Lu Laodao's face was not bad to begin with. Although he wasn't exactly noble or heroic, he still had some bearing. At this moment, because of his nervousness, he silently took a few steps toward the swordsman. The 6 people became alert. "What are you doing? Go back. Heroes, please listen to me," Lu Laodao said. "I'm Hun Yuanzi of the Dongxian sect." After saying this, he took 2 steps forward. "I'm quite famous in this Jianghu. Let me Laodao talk to you about today's matter." The swordsman with high cheekbones and narrow eyes frowned slightly. "Dongxian sect." He looked at Lu Laodao carefully. "Daotong Dongxian sect?" Lu Laodao stroked his beard and smiled. "Haha, although not the right one, it's not far from it. I's Dongxian sect is the Dongxian sect in Luoyang City. They also practice the Xianmen orthodox method passed down by the supreme celestial being." When the swordsman heard this, he snorted, annoyed and amused. "So it's this kind of Jianghu scum. If you take it a step further, I'll break your leg." At this moment, Lu Laodao was only 2 steps away from the place where the finishing touch was. He braced himself and said, "The world's Taoists are one family. Back then As he said this, there was suddenly a whistling sound that broke through the air. The forest was originally dark, with only 2 bonfires giving off a dim yellow light. However, in such a dense forest, it seemed to be absorbed by the surrounding fog. At this moment, along with this whistling sound, a bright light appeared. A thin sword was inserted into the ground beside Lu Laodao. The hilt of the sword was still trembling, giving off a buzzing sound. Large amounts of soil and dead leaves flew up. Lu Laodao was so frightened that he shivered and sat on the ground. This time, he happened to sit at the place where the finishing touch was. The swordsman glanced at him in disdain and snorted coldly. "Get lost." Lu Laodao looked at the sword and scratched the ground with his hands and feet for a while before running back to the bonfire. The people in the escort agency were not in the mood to ridicule this pair of master and disciple. Their eyes were focused on the sword that flew out of nowhere. The shape of the sword was exactly the same as the swordsman's. Obviously, it was not reinforcement. There was a piece of paper pierced through the body of the sword. On the paper was written in small script, which was obviously flying sword messenger. Whether it was messenger pigeons or darts, they were all commonly used by Jianghu swordsmen. Flying swords were not that rare. But the scary thing was that no one saw the person who threw the sword. At least in the eyes of the people in the escort agency, this skill had reached an unimaginable level. "It's done." Li Yunqin smiled in the flickering light of the fire and patted Lu Laodao's arm. "You have to act. I promise you will like it." Note: freehand brushwork, commonly known as rough brushwork. Symmetrical with meticulous brushwork. This was the name of China's painting technique. Through concise and indulgent brushwork, it focused on expressing the mood of the subject. Freehand painting was the basic form of traditional Chinese painting, on par with meticulous brushwork. Qi Baishi's famous work, Shrimp, was a freehand painting. Su Beihong's Galloping Horse was the same. The famous work, Along the River during the Qingming Festival, was a work that was half meticulous and half freehand. Chapter 14. The swordsman in the Taoist robe stood up and pulled out the sword carefully. He took down the letter and opened it. After a quick glance, he passed it to another person. It seemed that this person was illiterate. The other person took the letter and read it carefully for a while before raising his head. "No need," he said, "kill them all." "Oh." The swordsman with narrow eyes and high cheekbones shook his head slightly and sighed. "What a troublesome matter. There are quite a lot of people here." Then he stood up with his sword and turned to the people of the escort agency, who were a dozen steps away. The 5 people behind him also stood up. A formless aura and killing intent suddenly spread out in the dark night. Even the bonfire behind them seemed to dim slightly, and it became shrunken. "It's time," Xiao Duanhong said in a low voice. He could read lips. Although they were a dozen steps away, and the light was not bright, this experienced man's eyes were not wrong. Looking at the aura and expression of the 6 people, he knew that they had the intention to kill. The reason was because of that flying sword letter, although he did not know what was written on it. But now he knew that apart from the 6 masters not far away, there might be a super master somewhere. A super master who was beyond his understanding of kung fu. It was at this moment that an absurd thought suddenly popped into his mind. Maybe that person was not a kung fu master. Maybe it was a cultivator. The kind that only existed in the legends of mortals. The kind that ordinary people rarely saw in their lifetime. Or immortals. But in the face of life and death, all he could do was to increase his courage. At least he could not be killed obediently. So he repeated, "It's time. Get ready." Then he looked at his daughter and said in a decisive tone, "Jessen. Later you will follow Sifu. Old man, old 6, we have to keep them busy. The forest is dense, let the children run out." Xiao Jessen and Xiao Sifu wanted to say something, but Xiao Duanhong shouted in a low voice, "Shut up. Now is not the time for you to be willful. If anyone escapes, take a detour back to the city of Wei. Tell the people in the escort agency to take the money and leave immediately. Don't ever show your face in public again." He looked at the 6 people, and then glanced at the dark and gloomy shadows of the trees. This might be related to those people. This rare sternness stunned everyone. Xiao Sifu could sense the fear in his tone, but he still had some doubts. "Uncle, who are they?" "Cultivators." Xiao Duanhong glanced at Lu Laodao, who was whispering to Li Yunxin without knowing that a disaster was coming. A real cultivator. The 2 groups of people faced each other in the dim firelight, separated by 15 steps. The swordsman with narrow eyes and high cheekbones revealed a mocking smile. "Why bother? Why don't we both save some energy? You people are like ants in my eyes. If we really fight, you won't be able to defeat the power of my sword. Why struggle at death's door?" Xiao Duanhong stared at the thin sword in his hand without saying a word, but his energy had been pushed to the peak. He knew that this was probably the last battle of his life, but he didn't even know why there was this battle. Why did he kidnap them? Why did he kill people? This was a question that everyone wanted to understand, but no one asked it, until they heard the young man say in a light and puzzled tone, "But everyone, why do you want to kill us?" No one was in the mood to laugh at his stupidity, naivety, or fearlessness. Even Xiao Jessen could only sigh in her heart. The little girl felt very sad. She didn't expect that the first love at first sight would happen to her, and the other party was such a person. However, these words actually broke the tense atmosphere in the forest. The swordsman with narrow eyes and high cheekbones was about to pounce, but after hearing this sentence, his expression changed wonderfully. It looked like he was relieved of a heavy burden. The swordsman stopped and sneered. He flicked the thin sword in his hand with his finger, and looked at the dozen people not far away with a mocking gaze. "That's good. You can die knowing ghosts. When you go to hell, don't give us the wrong name. We 6 brothers are the 6 ghosts of the river. Have you heard of this name?" Xiao Duanhong was slightly stunned, then frowned. 6 ghosts of the river. Weren't you all killed by black-blading Jurin long ago? Huh. If we didn't meet a benefactor, it might be the truth. But now, a trace of hatred flashed in the swordsman's eyes. "After this matter, we brothers will go find him and settle the score." "Hey, it sounds awesome." The young man's frivolous voice interrupted in a discordant manner. "What nobleman? Judging from your names, you didn't have a good life in the past. The man named Black Blading Jurin sounds like a big shot. I guess you used to be villains hated by everyone, and then you aroused public anger, and were eliminated by that black blade in the name of love and justice. Oh, you were about to be eliminated, and then you met a benefactor. Who is it?" The swordsman didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled darkly. He. Speaking of this benefactor, do you ordinary people know about the Ling Su sword sect?" The people in the escort agency looked at each other in dismay. In fact, almost everyone had heard of the Ling Su sword sect. Which prefecture didn't have a few Ling Su sword sects? But they didn't know which one he was talking about. But Li Yunxin immediately clapped his hands, and the crisp sound of his clapping spread far in the night. "Wow! Is it the Ling Su sword sect of the 72 sects?" The swordsman smiled proudly. "You have some knowledge." He cupped his hands toward the east and said, "That benefactor is a cultivator of the Ling Su sword sect. His title is Huainanzi, and he's the personal disciple of the sect leader. He's here to experience a tribulation. Do you know what a tribulation is?" Naturally, no one answered him. Then he began to talk to himself in a torrent of words. In fact, this person didn't know much. What he said, Li Yunqin had heard from Qi Songzi and Kong Kurako. In the end, the swordsman said, "So he gave us 6 elixirs. After eating one, our power increased greatly. If you're lucky today, you might be able to see Sendo. Unfortunately, Sendo has other important things to do today and can't come. You people are useless. Then it's a killing tribulation." After listening to him, Li Yunqin said, "So you kidnapped us and chased us here like pigs and sheep, waiting for your Sendo to come. When he comes, he kills people. I think he must have killed a lot of people. He probably has more than the 6 of you under him. There must be other puppets somewhere else. People like you find people for him, and when he comes, he kills them one by one. When he gets tired of killing people and thinks, 'Wow, killing people is really boring. I'd better be a quiet, handsome man,' then he'll forget about this tribulation. Am I right?" Li Yunqin's tone became serious. The swordsman looked at him in surprise and sneered. "Boy, you know a lot. What's your background?" At this moment, the people of the escort agency had become complete onlookers. Even Xiao Duanhong, who was the most knowledgeable, was confused by the discussion about caves, sects, and tribulations. After all, he wasn't a cultivator like Lu Laodao. Even Lu Laodao didn't know the details and taboos of many famous sections. But it didn't stop him from gradually realizing he had misjudged again. Li Yunqin, whom he once thought was a merchant's son who didn't understand the ways of the world and pretended to be experienced and calm, had actually displayed a skill that surprised him. He didn't know how the youngster did it. He was obviously in a life-and-death situation. But with just a few words, he made the 6 murderous stars reveal all the secrets they knew in a strange and crazy manner. Something was wrong. The youngster must have used some trick. Xiao Duanhong thought otherwise. It wouldn't be like this. Who is this youngster? Does that mean we're safe tonight? Xiao Duanhong looked at Li Yunqin again. Then his eyes fell on Lu Laodao behind him. His heart skipped a beat. Lu Laodao looked like a different person. He was no longer timid. Instead, he looked calm and steady. He sat cross-legged on the ground with his eyes slightly closed. He was mumbling something. It looked like, yes, it was him. Xiao Duanhong immediately felt his heart truly and thoroughly settle down. If that was the case, then everything could be explained. Old Master Lu was really hiding his strength. But as far as he knew, there were some Jianghu masters who liked to pretend to be wild and crazy. Just now, the swordsman said something about cultivators going through tribulations. Maybe this Lu Laodao was really a cultivator, and was also going through tribulations. This explanation was much more reasonable than that the young man was actually a shocking genius. How could there be so many mutants in the world? How could he have coincidentally met one? At this time, he saw Lu Laodao's right hand stretch out from his sleeve and make a sign. Almost at the same time, the swordsman's voice suddenly became loud. "Do you know how much we 6 brothers have suffered to have the skills we have today? Back then, the Black Blade wanted to kill us, treating us like ants. Today, who is an ant? Who dares to look down on us? After we take care of this matter, we will return to the river. We must let those people know. Ha! 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 Today we have made a name for ourselves in the Jianghu." At this time, not only Xiao Duanhong, but even the slowest person also noticed the abnormality of the 6 swordsmen. They were no longer arrogant and cold like before. Instead, they had become crazy. It was like they had lost their minds, and were talking to themselves with swords in their hands. They didn't care about the people around them, or what kind of situation they were in. From how the 6 of them met each other, how they learned their skills, how they became known as the 6 river ghosts, to what they did, how many people they killed, how they met Huainanzi of the Ling Su sword sect, how they took the pills, and where they went after that, everything was revealed. Li Yunqin already knew everything he wanted to know. Then he realized that this matter might be a little troublesome. because now he knew the identity of Qi Songzi and Kong Kanzi. Chapter 15. These two were not the loose Taoist priests they were talking about. They were also from the Ling Su sword sect, the third and fourth direct disciples of the sect leader. Li Yunqin was not in the mood to consider whether the direct disciples of the sect leader were too weak, or the formation left by his parents was too powerful. He only knew that the matter that he had thought was over was now full of twists and turns. The two junior brothers were still alive, and it sounded like they were quite powerful. Once that person found out that the two senior brothers were missing and wanted to investigate, would he really find out that it was him? He didn't know the means of the immortals very well, so he didn't dare to speculate. But he already suspected that the reason why that person didn't have time to come here tonight to transcend the tribulation was that he was investigating that matter. What a pity! He had planned to escape after learning the details. But now that he knew these things, it was possible that the master behind these 6 swordsmen, Huainan Zi, would notice something was wrong. It was a matter of life and death. He couldn't be too careful. Then, he couldn't keep these 6 swordsmen alive. The effect of the traveling in brocade at night had been maximized. Lu Laodao, who was guiding the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, felt more and more frightened. He could be considered an expert, who could draw works with artistic conception, but compared with this thing in front of him, it was like garbage. The 6 swordsmen in the formation had completely lost themselves and were controlled by some powerful emotion. But Li Yunqin still felt that it was not enough. After all, he had created it in a hurry. According to his father, after the traveling in brocade at night was completed, the person in the formation should lose himself. Even if he stabbed him, he would still be immersed in the illusory glory and be unable to extricate himself. Not like what he was doing now. So, he had to think of another way. If he had to kill them. Xiao Duanhong pushed aside the people around him and walked to Li Yunqin and Lu Laodao. He first made a deep bow to Lu Laodao, then turned to Li Yunqin and nodded solemnly. Then he said, "I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. I have been rude to Sendo. Please forgive me, Sendo." He didn't even look at the excited and eloquent 6 people over there. His expression was calm and collected, as if he had already entrusted his life to these 2 masters. Everyone in the escort agency looked at each other. But soon, even the slowest among them realized why their escorts were doing this. The old man and the young man whom they had looked down on and ridiculed before were actually hiding their strength. Everything they did had a deeper meaning. "Dare I ask, Sendo, what should we do now? Have the 6 of them been restrained?" Xiao Duanhong asked Lu Laodao. Of course, Lu Laodao couldn't answer this question. Fortunately, his acting skills were excellent. He only raised his eyes slightly and stroked his beard. "I am casting a spell, so it's not convenient for me to speak. Ask that disciple of mine. I have already explained the crux of this array to him." "Not at all," Li Yunqin said. He spoke very quickly, his brows slightly furrowed as if he was thinking about something. In fact, he didn't want to give Xiao Duanhong a chance to get to the bottom of things. For example, why a young man they met on the road could help a Sendo cast a spell. "Don't act rashly now. You can talk and move around a little, but don't think about running. If you move too much, the 6 of them will be agitated and will have to wake up. Right now they feel that everything is under their control, so they are putting on a show." Li Yunqin turned to look at Xiao Duanhong, then at the people behind him. "Then, Mr. Qiao, if you and your people launch a surprise attack the moment they wake up, what are the chances of you killing the 6 of them?" Xiao Duanhong was slightly stunned. This young man's tone was very familiar. He didn't sound like someone he was familiar with, but he sounded like someone who was used to giving orders and instructing others to do things. He realized that his previous conjecture about this young man's identity was completely wrong. This was probably not a child from a simple merchant family. Perhaps he was the young master of some wealthy family. But what was his relationship with Lu Laodao? From the looks of it, the two seemed to have a tacit understanding. He hurriedly cupped his hands. "I dare not. I am a crude person, and dare not call myself Mr. If you want to talk about a surprise attack." Xiao Duanhong's face reddened slightly. I'm afraid none of them will succeed. Probably 2 or 3 of them will be injured. But young master might not be clear about these things. These 6 people are second-rate experts in the pugilistic world. They are also 1 in 1,000 characters. Although the rest of us... got it. Li Yunqin interrupted him. Then we have to think of another way. His face was expressionless, which made Xiao Duanhong feel hurt. Of course, he didn't expect this young man to understand what a second-rate expert meant. The swordsmen in the legends were often high and mighty, and a first-rate expert was only a supporting character in the stories that circulated on the streets. As for a second-rate expert, it was a derogatory term in the eyes of laymen. But the reality was that a person with mediocre aptitude who started practicing martial arts at a young age, had special people taking care of the herbs and food, and was apprenticed to a famous teacher, and learned the best techniques, could only touch the boundary of a third-rate expert when they were in their prime. To become a second-rate expert, in addition to having a good environment and opportunities, talent was also required. As for a first-rate expert, they were really a 1 in a million dragon or phoenix. Xiao Duanhong felt that his aptitude was passable. He had worked hard in his childhood, and his family was well off. At this age, he could barely touch the boundary of a second-rate expert. He was already quite proud of himself. At least among the few bodyguard firms in Luoyang City, his skills were ranked among the top. But he felt that this young man probably didn't know about these things. Perhaps the young man was born into a noble family, and practiced magic since he was young, so he wouldn't be interested in practicing martial arts. Most of the wealthy families in the city were like this. Mu Xian pursued the Tao, and liked to learn from cultivators to meditate and breathe. Although it wasn't proper, and could only be considered to be part of the cultured, he had never been interested in techniques that strengthened his strength. He had no choice but to cup his fists again, and observe Lu Laodao's reaction from the corner of his eyes. He asked tentatively, "Then, is there anything else we can help with?" Lu Laodao was unfathomable and didn't say anything. Li Yunqin thought for a moment and said, "I have an idea." He didn't finish his sentence. The wind in the forest suddenly became stronger. It was windy to begin with. The spring wind was strong. Even in such a dense forest, there was still a slight breeze. But this wind was strange. It was eerily cold. The wind seemed to roll up along the ground, circling around everyone's body. The 2 bonfires dimmed at the same time, and the leaves rustled. Lu Laodao's beard curled up from the wind, but he wasn't in the mood to pay attention to it. Because the moment the wind rose, he suddenly discovered that the flow of spiritual energy in the formation had become chaotic. Thus, the 6 swordsmen who were still talking hesitantly slowed down, then looked at each other, and shut their mouths awkwardly. In the next moment, the 6 murderous stars who had escaped the control of the formation finally realized that something was wrong. The swordsman with high cheekbones and narrow eyes frowned. "There's an expert, kill them first." Almost at the same time, a shrill yet indistinct voice accompanied the gust of cold wind sounded in everyone's ears. "I died so tragically." The swordsmen who were about to launch their attacks stopped again because of this voice. Lu Laodao's eyes widened, and his lips trembled slightly. Xiao Duanhong and the people from the escort agency looked around in confusion, trying to figure out if they had heard wrong. Li Yunqin sighed. A classic opening of a horror film. Then the next sentence was probably, "Give me back my head." When this second voice rang out in the dark and dense forest, even the coldest swordsman's sword began to tremble slightly. In such a world, even the most knowledgeable person, of course this did not include true cultivators, could not be bombarded with information like in Li Yunqin's era. Li Yunqin knew the female ghost's first, second, third steps. He knew that there were legendary water monsters in the river, Dragon King in the sea, King Yama on the ground, and golden immortals in the sky. He knew what the life of an emperor was like, what the life of a high-ranking official was like, and what the life of a wealthy family was like. He could even develop aesthetic fatigue. For example, after hearing the female ghost's 2 sentences, he thought to himself, "Oh, it's this trick again." So even if he was surprised that, "I'm finally going to see a real ghost for the first time in this world," the fear in his heart was far less than that of others. And then, The female ghost appeared in a very classic way. A woman dressed in white walked out from behind a bush with her arms crossed. There was a large patch of blood on her body that kept dripping to the ground. But her head was not on her body. There was a bowl-sized wound on her neck. Bone stubble, trachea, and blood vessels could be seen. Her head was on the ground. 4 or 5 steps in front of her, it was rolling on the ground. Her eyes were still open, and she looked at the body behind her in a crooked manner. So the body followed the rolling head swaying forward, and as it walked it let out a mournful cry. "Give me back my head." Chapter 16. In the darkness of the night, a small black donkey walked along the road. On the back of the donkey sat a pretty girl. In front of the donkey was a maid with 2 buns on her head. She was carrying a small blue bundle with white flowers on it, and a lantern in her hand. The black donkey was well fed. Its fur was shiny and glossy. When it walked, it raised its white chin, and the 2 little bells on its chest jingled. The sound traveled far in the darkness. When they reached the bottom of a gentle slope, the maid kicked something. She frowned and let out a soft cry. She was wearing a pair of thin cloth shoes, but the thing she kicked was sharp and hard. It hurt her foot. The maidservant furrowed her delicate brows and lowered the lantern to illuminate it. She discovered that it was a saber. She looked into the distance and turned to the person sitting on the donkey. "Oh, miss, look." The light from the lantern lit up the surrounding area. She saw the scattered weapons on the ground and the burnt skeletons of the carriages. A few cars leaned crookedly against the gentle slope, and the grass on the ground had already been scorched. The girl sitting on the donkey tilted her head and looked at the ground. She covered her mouth with her hand and said, "Oh." She had a pair of bright black eyes and a white face. In the darkness of the night, it seemed to emit light. She had a pair of slender hands. They were the hands of a young lady who had never left her room. But her black hair was combed at the back of her head. There was only a small wooden hairpin in her hair. She did not look like a young lady from a rich family. This is. The young lady on the donkey said softly. "Did they encounter bandits?" The maid pursed her lips and thought for a moment. She nodded with certainty. "I think so." The young lady on the donkey covered her chest with her other slender hand. She frowned and said, "Then a lot of people died." The maid waved her hand. No, Miss, look. There are only weapons on the ground. There is no blood. Maybe they are still alive. I have never encountered such a thing. I want to go and take a look." The young lady glanced at the forest in the distance. The tall trees were connected together in the night, like countless hazy tall demons, making a rustling sound in the night wind. The young maidservant sighed in distress. She raised her head to look at the girl on the donkey's back, and counted her fingers. "Ah, Mississippi, a few days ago, you said you had never seen a monkey show before. So we ran around for 2 days to watch it. You said you've never heard of storytelling. We listened to them talk about the legend of the Dragon King for a day and a half at the tea house. The day before yesterday, you said you wanted to eat Hu biscuits. So we waited for the Hu merchants in the city of Hui for another day. But miss, you still want to go to the city of Wei to watch the Lantern Festival. We can't make it." The young lady thought for a moment and sighed. "But it smells good." The maid's eyes widened. "Ah, let's go there. There's a very fragrant smell." The young lady patted the donkeys but lightly, and the little black donkey trotted a few steps into the wilderness by the roadside. Thus, the young lady sniffled and raised her slender hand to point to the forest in the distance. "It's over there. The fragrance is heading there." The maid rubbed the bun on her head in distress. "Miss, let's go and have a look." The young lady smiled slightly, revealing her fine snow-white teeth. The young maid couldn't dissuade the young master, so she carried the lantern and walked into the wild grass. 2 people and a donkey walked in the dark wilderness. There was a beam-like light in front of them. A slender figure walked through the wild grass that was almost as tall as a person. The young maid complained, "If I knew this earlier, I would have told the master." She pulled the wild grass while nagging. "I thought there would be delicious food and fun things to do when I sneaked out with the young lady. But the things that the young lady likes are all things that I'm tired of. In my opinion, young lady, you can't be like this, running here and there." There are many fun things in the capital. Otherwise, let's go to the vast ocean. I heard that there. The young lady was neither angry nor annoyed. In fact, it seemed that she didn't listen to the maid's words. She stared at the forest with her big eyes. After walking for half an hour, the maidservant suddenly tripped and stumbled. This time, she glanced at the ground and jumped up like a cat. Oh, my shoes! Under the light, the blue embroidered satin shoes had a big stain. The blackened blood, which was not dry yet, stuck to the surface of the shoe. A man's body fell in the grass, holding half a branch in his hand. Blood flowed out from his neck. There was a finger-wide wound on his throat, and it was neatly cut. Seeing this scene, the young lady was also shocked. She gently covered her mouth. I just bought the shoes yesterday." Then she looked at the body. "You see, I told you people would die." The young maid's face was bitter, and her voice was almost crying. "Miss, let's go back. There must be a lot more ahead." The girl on the back of the donkey peered into the forest and smiled. "I can almost smell him. Let's look again." So the master and the servant followed the slight smell of blood and continued to walk into the forest in the waist-high wild grass. The bell on the little black donkey's chest tinkled, and the sound traveled far in the night. ******, Li Yunqin held his breath and pushed aside a clump of leaves in front of him. He saw a swordsman with a sword. This swordsman was not as skillful as the last two. It was not only about swordsmanship, but also the use of talismans. Both Qi Songzi and Kong Kanzi could use talismans after their Sea of Qi was sealed. Before those things were destroyed by his design, they played a great role, including but not limited to tracking, hiding, and restoring strength. The swordsman was not as skillful as the last two. The 6 of them were very confident in themselves when they killed people in 6 different directions. But Li Yunqin was also very confident. He thought that with someone to distract the pursuers, he could escape easily. But at this moment, the people from the escort agency seemed to have brought him some trouble. A man and a woman fled in this direction in a panic. It seemed that they were Qiao Jiesin and Qiao Sifu. It was very dark in the forest, and only the fine moonlight shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves, which was almost negligible. But Qiao Jiesin's unique girlish smell and slender figure made Li Yunqin recognize her. The 2 of them had tried their best to slow down their movements and breathe lightly, so as not to attract attention. But the pursuers seemed to be better at this than them. The swordsman was now only 1 step away from Li Yunqin, and his footsteps were firm and light as he approached the 2 of them. Li Yunqin estimated that the swordsman would attack when they were only 5 steps away. He had seen the swordsman kill people like that a quarter of an hour ago. Within 5 steps, the slender sword was as fast as lightning. He could clearly see the opponent's intentions and movements, but without the support of spiritual power, he could not deal with it. Fortunately, he had practiced the water cloud force since he was a child. When it came to holding his breath and hiding, he was quite good at it. Otherwise, he would probably have died in the hands of the 2 Taoist priests, and would not have lived until now. He looked around, hoping to find something, but there was nothing to be found. There should be someone nearby. Otherwise, what was the matter with the female ghost just now? As soon as the female ghost appeared, the people around the fire were shocked. Taking advantage of the fact that the female ghost went in the direction of the swordsman, and they were confused, the people from the escort agency ran away. They thought that the evil ghost could stop them, or even scare the swordsman away and kill him. Who knew that in the end, the female ghost disappeared with just 1 sword strike. If it wasn't for the fact that Li Yunqin had done something similar before, he would have suspected that it was someone who used a painting Dao Void Realm method to scare people, just like he did previously. But at this time, several people from the escort agency had died, and the master had not appeared. The swordsman was already 7 steps away from the 2 of them. At this time, Qiao Jiesin and Qiao Sifu thought that they were temporarily safe, and whispered to each other, completely unaware that they had become prey. But it was this conversation that saved their lives. Because Li Yunqin heard eldest Miss Qiao say in a low voice, "4th brother, do you think father and the others have escaped?" Qiao Sifu was probably not in the mood to answer her, or he simply did not know what to say. So Qiao Jiesin said to herself, I don't know how he is. I hope he also escaped. Li Yunqin sighed in his heart. It seemed that what he had done before had changed his image in this girl's heart. She seemed to be the first person in this world, other than his own parents, who had expressed sincere but unreasonable affection for him. So this matter was very troublesome. If he had not heard this, he could probably grit his teeth and harden his heart, let the swordsman kill the two people and leave, and then he would quietly retreat. But at this time, he felt that he probably could not do this. This was not a matter of morality or sympathy, but because if this girl was immediately killed in front of him after saying such words, he would not be able to think clearly. The night wind rose again, and the leaves in the forest rustled. Li Yunqin took out his brush from his sleeve. This brush had been with him for almost 10 years, and the tip was still sharp and round, showing that it was not an ordinary brush. But to him, it was only useful, and it did not even look as beautiful as those Taobao goods from his era, that cost 25 yuan. He could not make a painting formation like the one just now, but it could still scare people. As a painter, the most important quality was to be good at observation. Fortunately, no matter in his previous life or this life, he was a guy who liked to stare at things or people in a daze. First, you have to see their essence, qi and spirit. You have to see the spiritual energy flowing in there or her, or their body. As the saying goes, the great Tao is formless, but the heaven and earth have spirits. Even a table has spiritual energy in its body. See the origin of the painting, and then use the brush and paper to draw, and then have an inextricable connection with the will and spirit of the painting, and get a virtual image. In the words of his parents, this was indeed the most basic method of a painter, but in this secular world, it was already an extremely brilliant method of immortals. He had drawn the image of the 9th young master before, so the 9th young master had sensed it, and came to his rescue. Now that he wanted to save Qiao Jiesin, he had to use this method again. The technique that he had practiced for more than 10 years was completed in almost a breath. The paper was hidden in the cuffs of his sleeves. With a twist of his wrist, his fingers flicked, and a small person appeared on the paper. The swordsman took another step, and was only 6 steps away from Qiao Jiesin and Xiao Sifu. Chapter 17. Xiao Sifu inadvertently looked back. His original intention was to see if there were any pursuers, and he got what he wanted. A ray of moonlight shone through the gaps of the leaves, shining on the swordsman's thin sword. A cold light flashed. "Run!" he subconsciously shouted, pulling Qiao Jiesin's hand to escape. But the swordsman's sword reacted faster than him. The cold snort, and the sound of the sword cutting through the air came at the same time. In the blink of an eye, the swordsman crossed the distance of 6 steps, like a goshawk pouncing on Xiao Sifu, the tip of the sword aimed at his throat. But he was still 1 step behind. Xiao Sifu dodged once, his neck avoided the sword, and his left shoulder was sent forward. Blood spurted out. This seemingly light and graceful sword strike was actually very powerful, and it immediately crippled one of his arms. But the swordsman was only 3 steps away from them. The thin sword moved like a snake, aiming for his throat again. Xiao Sifu's momentum was too strong to dodge. Qiao Jiesin knew that this was a matter of life and death, so she used all her strength to hit the swordsman, trying to deflect the sword. The swordsman didn't expect this girl to have such courage, and was led astray by her, causing the sword to miss its target. Xiao Sifu dodged the sword. His body tilted and fell backward. He was lying on a protruding branch of an old root. The dry branch, as thick as a thumb, pierced through his back and came out of his chest. But it didn't penetrate his clothes. It propped up a small tent in front of his chest, which was soon soaked with blood. Bad luck. The swordsman snorted, as if he was very unhappy about this failure. But it didn't matter. He had already used one hand to clamp Qiao Jiesin's arm. The girl tried to resist in the dark, but her means were not worth mentioning compared to the swordsman. The swordsman shook his sleeves, turned his sword, and stabbed Qiao Jiesin's throat. At this moment he heard a voice. "Don't let her." The voice was harsh and short, distorted by the rustling of the leaves, but it didn't prevent him from hearing it clearly. The swordsman glanced out of the corner of his eye, and was surprised to find a person standing behind a short tree 2 steps away from him. Big brother. He frowned, feeling a little surprised. The swordsman with high cheekbones and narrow eyes stood not far away, as if he was standing against the moonlight. Because he looked a little hazy, it added a bit of a mortal air to him. His voice sounded a little strange, but the swordsman didn't think much of it. After all, that was the person he had been most familiar with for more than 10 years. Moreover, it did look very familiar. The swordsman with high cheekbones and narrow eyes said something, but I couldn't hear it clearly. Thus, he restrained Xiao Jiesin with one hand and took a step forward. His elder brother stood motionless under the tree. It seemed that he was unable to move. He was probably injured. With this step, he could see everything clearly. He noticed the problem. His big brother looked a little transparent. It seemed like the female ghost that appeared earlier. A sense of foreboding rose in his heart, and he subconsciously retreated and brandished his sword in defense. This vigilance saved him once. He saw the person hiding in the bushes beside him. A young man in white was holding a branch as thick as a child's arm and was about to stab him. The angle chosen was very tricky, and it was close enough to him. If he took another step forward, he would almost be hit. But his movement was too slow, so slow that it seemed to be motionless. The swordsman sneered. "You're just a firefly. You overestimate yourself." He took another step back and stabbed with his sword. At this moment, he suddenly realized that there was something wrong with this young man. No matter how he looked at it, he was still hazy, like a shadow. He took a step back. At the moment when the sole of his shoe touched the ground, he suddenly felt a heart-wrenching pain coming from his anus. Something, maybe it was a branch that was still branching, pierced into his anus. Maybe he could endure the pain and fight back if he was stabbed in the leg, arm or back. But this kind of injury, such a big injury, followed by a huge psychological impact. The complicated emotions and severe pain broke the swordsman's will in an instant. He was like the most panicked person, shaking off Xiao Jiesin. He tried to step forward to get rid of that thing, while waving the thin sword in his hand behind him. He didn't even dare to turn around to see where the attacker was, because it was too painful. But Li Yunxin had already stood up behind him. His arms clamped the thick branch tightly, and he thrust it forward and rushed 2 steps forward. Because of his movement, the swordsman lost his balance and fell to the ground. The heart-wrenching scream stopped abruptly. The 5-feet-long branch pierced 2 feet into his body, and the swordsman was completely dead. Li Yunxin let go of the branch in his hand and clapped his hands. Not far away, the 2 shadows slowly dissipated in the wind. 2 pieces of rice paper fluttered down and quickly turned into ashes. "Hurry up, someone might be coming." Li Yunxin reached out to Xiao Jiesin, who was sitting on the ground. Miss Qiao stared at the corpse on the ground, and then at Li Yunxin. She felt as if there were 2 more balls of fire on her face. How did you? She had a lot of questions to ask. For example, why were you here? How did you create 2 shadows? How did you kill him? How did you stab that place? It was a pity that this young man had brought her too many surprises. So much so that she didn't know how to ask the question. But she wasn't a weak and hesitant person. She turned to look at Qiao Sifu, who was lying on the ground. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed Li Yunxin's hand and used it to stand up. "Okay, follow me. No matter how scared you are, don't scream. We can run out." Li Yunxin lowered his body and went into the dense forest. Xiao Jiesin pursed her lips and followed. The youngster's voice wasn't loud, but it made her feel at ease. Especially after experiencing the life and death situation just now, she felt even more at ease. Li Yunxin knew that someone would catch up, and it might be the one who was more difficult to deal with. He already knew the feeling of being drawn by someone. That feeling was quite strange. It was something he had never experienced in his previous life. Sixth sense. An abnormally strong sixth sense. That was probably what it felt like. It was like hearing a soft voice call out to you in a quiet room. Then, you felt some kind of call in your heart. Something had happened somewhere, and you had to find it. If you were far away, this feeling might disappear before you found the place. But tonight, at such a distance, Li Yunxin knew that Big Brother would soon arrive at the scene of his brother's anus being pierced. he would angrily start to chase after it. The two of them ran in the darkness and the night wind. Their ears were filled with the rustling of leaves. It was as if there was endless darkness in front and beyond. As long as they plunged into it, there would be nowhere to hide, and they would never have to come out again. This feeling, something's wrong. Li Yunxin stopped and said. Xiao Jiesin didn't stop, and bumped into Li Yunxin's back. The youngster reached out to support her. He felt the softness and wetness of the girl's body. She was sweating a lot, and her body was trembling slightly. He didn't know if it was because of fatigue or fear. She was gasping for air, and the hot air blew on his chest. What's wrong? Xiao Jiesin asked with a trembling voice. Li Yunxin was slightly stunned. He realized something. He wasn't a real youngster, but this girl was a real girl. He could think and speak like a weather-beaten adult, but this young girl. She was only a teenager. In her previous world, she was still chasing stars and reading books. She was indeed afraid. Even when she was afraid, she tried her best to run away with him without saying a word. She wasn't Shinibu, nor was she a saint. When he said something's wrong with his adult mind, she would restrain her fear and ask him, "What's wrong?" She didn't act coquettishly, and she didn't cause trouble. This was rare. He sighed slightly and held her arm tightly. He only let go after she stood firm and asked in a low voice, "Are you afraid?" "Ah." The girl panted and put her hand on the tree trunk beside her, as if holding on to something would make her feel more at ease. "I know you're afraid." Li Yunxin untied the water bag from his waist and handed it to her. "Drink some water." There are some things you may not understand. Most fear comes from the unknown, so it's normal for you to be afraid. The people who chased us tonight didn't have any grudge against us. They were just working for someone else. They didn't have any grudge against us either. They just wanted to kill someone, so they were looking for someone. And they happened to find us. So in a nutshell, we're unlucky. The girl took the water bag and drank a mouthful. Then she held it with both hands and slightly calmed down her breathing. She tried her best to listen to Li Yunxin's words carefully. In fact, listening to his words made her feel at ease and calm. She didn't know why. She used to want to roam the pugilistic world and be a heroine in red. But after experiencing what happened tonight, she suddenly felt that she didn't need to do or think about anything. She only needed to listen to other people's arrangements and protection, which was actually very reassuring. "I know it's hard, but I need you to do one thing. You have to know that we can't save the others now. Maybe your father, and my teacher are hiding somewhere. Thinking of them will make us anxious, but there's nothing we can do. We can't be anxious. Don't panic. Only by calming down can we deal with the people who are chasing us. They have a total of 6 people. I killed one just now. Maybe the others also killed one. At most, there are 5 left. There's one more who should be chasing us. That means there are only 4 people chasing after the others. So if we keep ourselves alive and delay the people coming, we'll buy time for your father and the others to share the pressure. You're running for your life now, but you're also saving people. Don't you think so?" Xiao Jiesin tried her best to open her eyes wide and nodded. "Good girl. Let's go." Xiao Jiesin took a deep breath and went into the dense forest again. She took 2 or 3 steps and then turned back to look at Li Yunxin. But she found that the young man was gone. Her heart that had just calmed down suddenly became chaotic again. She quickly turned around and took a step back. She wanted to see if she walked too fast and the young man didn't catch up. But after taking 2 steps, she suddenly saw a clear light coming towards her. The thin, lightning-like light only appeared in her sight for a second, and she felt that the whole world became dark. She didn't even have time to think, because she still didn't know what had happened. The swordsman withdrew his thin sword. Xiao Jiesin softly fell to the ground. There was a thin red mark between her eyebrows, like a red bean. "You're courting death," he said in a low voice, then turned to look at Li Yunxin. "You have some tricks. Tell me, who are you?" Chapter 18. Li Yunxin glanced at Xiao Jiesin to make sure that she was really dead. The girl was lying on the grass. Her death was not beautiful, and her eyes were not closed. He sighed and shook his head slightly. Girls in ancient times were not as pretty as girls in his time. At least in general. Natural beauty was always good, but it also meant that they were not as white and fragrant, and their hair was not as smooth. How could they hide the pimples on their faces? But this Miss Qiao was a beauty even in modern times. Li Yunxin had a good impression of her. He did not expect that she would die in less than a day. As expected, modern civilization and a society ruled by law were better. At least people would not die casually. But he only sighed for a moment. He had done many things in his previous life, and he had seen many dead people. Since he could accept transmigration and monsters, he could also accept the death of a few people. So he quickly retracted his gaze and looked at the swordsman. I am afraid that you will be scared to death if I tell you. The swordsman was startled and frowned. He had indeed realized that this young man in white was not ordinary. No matter if he was the son of a merchant or the son of a government official, he would not be able to look normal after seeing a dead person. He did not even look sad or sad. Not to mention that he had displayed unusual abilities. He was not a simple person of the secular world. Then, maybe he really had something to do with those immortals. The 6 ghosts in the river had been chased by the black knifing Juran like stray dogs. It was only after they met that immortal that they managed to turn the tables. Thus, they knew very well what kind of people they couldn't afford to provoke. The 36 paradises and the 72 sects were like clouds in the sky to them in the past. But now they knew how terrifying anyone who was related to those people was. And this young man's previous actions, his current reaction, and his extremely arrogant words made the swordsman realize that he might have encountered a troublesome person. He could not kill him. But if he did not kill him, he would have already offended him. What if this young man held a grudge against him, and he was really from some paradises or sects? How could small characters like them bear this? They were just randomly robbing some people by the road. How did they get into such an undeserved disaster? Li Yunxin understood the swordsman's thoughts in just a few seconds. Thus he decided to make another risky move. He didn't summon the 9th young master, because he was afraid that he would kill innocent people. Now that Qiao Jiesin was dead and those innocent people might have been slaughtered by the other swordsman, he had nothing to worry about. Before the swordsman could change his mind and make up his mind, Li Yunxin used his fingers to clamp the portrait of the 9th young master in his sleeve. With just a light touch, the illusion of the 9th young master would suddenly appear, and the ferocious demon would soon arrive. But at this moment, an angry rebuke resounded in the forest. The sound seemed to come from all directions, startling the birds that were resting in the branches and leaves, and causing them to fly up into the sky. Where did you come from? How dare you behave atrociously in my temporary imperial residence? Li Yunxin and the swordsman were stunned at the same time. 1 second later, Li Yunxin ran wildly toward a bush in the north. According to his parents, painters were the group of people who were most sensitive to Reiki among all the cultivators in the world. Li Yunxin couldn't agree more. For example, when the sound rang out, he felt a kind of familiar Reiki at the same time. This spiritual qi had also appeared when the female ghost appeared before. The female ghost appeared and disturbed the simple painting array that he and Lao Dao had set up. But Li Yunxin believed that the owner of the Reiki had no evil intentions and wanted to save him. Last time, it scared the 6 swordsmen, and this time, it bought him some time. The source of the Reiki was behind the bush in the north. He didn't know whether the existence was human, ghost, demon or immortal, but he knew that at least for now, it didn't want to kill him. When he stopped and said to Qiao Jiesin that something was wrong, he was referring to this matter. At that time, he was sure that he saw the same tree twice in a row. Ghosts hit a wall. It was probably also this existence that didn't want him to leave the forest. It might need him to do something for it. Li Yunxin could guess. He rushed into the bush, and after running for a dozen steps, he found that the front suddenly opened up. Behind the forest was an open space, and in the middle of the open space stood a small, dilapidated temple. Half of the temple had collapsed, and the reason why it didn't turn into a pile of rubble was that the other half was supported by an old tree. This tree probably grew out of the temple, and after so many years, it had become half a beam. A long, long time ago, there were probably people living in this forest, and the incense in this temple was also quite strong. Because even after so many years, this open space was still wide. Probably before the stone slabs were laid, some other treatment was done on the ground, so there was less vegetation, and a sky was surrounded by towering trees. The clear moonlight shone down from the sky, and Li Yunxin saw the broken plaque hanging on the lintel. Mrs. Sanhua Temple. What kind of name was this? It didn't sound like a real god. It was more like a long, long time ago. The foolish people built a temple for a spirit with some magical power, and worshipped it as a real god. But Li Yunxin only took a glance at it before she rushed into the hole where the door had long since disappeared. The altar in the temple was still there, and the clay statue on it was still there. But the surface had been weathered and eroded, and the face couldn't be seen clearly. But just by looking at the vague silhouette, the clay sculpture that was originally worshipped on the altar seemed to be a humanoid figure of the mountain god. Another temple. Li Yunxin stopped inside. To ordinary people, he was already in a dead end. But Li Yunxin knew that this was probably the only chance to save him, except for the 9th young master. This was because this seemingly dilapidated clay statue had an astonishingly active spiritual qi. He was no longer worried about the swordsman and calmed down. He walked around the clay statue with his hands behind his back, and shook his head slightly. "What are you? Why are you helping me?" Thus, the ethereal female voice from before rang out in the dilapidated temple again. "Because I am fated to meet you. Why don't you kneel when you see me? Did you bring 3 animals? Huh. Oh, you didn't bring 3 animals. I didn't bring 3 animals, huh? Nothing at all? Huh. Oh my humph. Why don't you kneel when you see me? Huh. Are you a Taoist? Huh. Taoist dancing?" Li Yunxin frowned slightly. He felt that this thing was not as simple as he thought. This thing knew the term Taoist dancing. He knew this phrase, his parents knew it, and the rest of the people probably didn't remember it. Kong Karako and Akamatsuzi knew it. But they seemed to be Kinzo people. And this one was probably a spirit. Chapter 19. His father and mother had told him many stories when he was still a child, when they thought he was still young and naive. Most of them were related to demons and mountain ghosts, just like the stories that the villagers told their children on summer nights, when they were fanning themselves under the big tree at the entrance of the village. But Li Yunxin knew that what his parents said was true, because there were many details that could support their story. They were all people with stories. Therefore, he also knew what kind of background these monsters had. Heaven and earth had spirits. Since it was an object with a spirit, even if it was a rock or a chair, it was possible for it to develop intelligence and cultivate a spirit body by chance. The most common ones were those creatures that were close to humans. Humans were the spirits of the spirits, and they had developed a mind and knew how to be educated. If they were close to humans for a long time, they would also have a mind. Or those that lived in the mountains, listened to the scriptures near the temples, and absorbed the incense, could easily become a demon. But even if they became a demon and had developed a mind, they might not understand human emotions. If a baby was thrown into a pack of wolves, it might turn into a beast in human form. Not to mention a demon that was originally a demon. Some demons had some cultivation experience, but their beastly nature was still hard to get rid of. They did evil things and even ate people. Some demons cast spells to confuse people's minds and disturb their morals. There were also demons that followed the rules and focused on cultivation, but it was rare. So when the Daotong and Kinzo disciples traveled the world, they would get rid of those demons. This was the merit. Li Yunxin's parents were open-minded people, but they did not have a good impression of those things. It was rare to see them ask if they had harmed the villagers before killing them. But Li Yunxin was actually very interested in these things. In his era, everyone had fantasized about the love between a scholar and a fox immortal. Many scholars were fascinated by Hong Xiu's reading at night. Moreover, his parents told him that demons loved Taoist painters the most. Taoist painters in the state of transcendent already had the supernatural power to turn paintings into reality. When encountering a spirit monster that had cultivated a spirit body, but had no physical body, and could only possess a body somewhere, he would be kind enough to give it a body. For that spirit monster, it would be a great blessing that was comparable to being reborn. Therefore, Li Yunxin initially thought that the gremlin should have instinctively sensed the unique spiritual aura produced by the drawing array, and then acted according to its own instincts and likes, planning to help him. It was able to create the illusion of a female ghost, and create the illusion of a ghost hitting the wall. It was obvious that it had some skills. Although such little tricks weren't worth mentioning in front of the Daotong and Kinzo disciples, it was enough to deal with ordinary people, even if it was a swordsman who had consumed a tyrannical elixir, or overdraft his life force as the price. But how did this monster know about Taoist Danqing? The disciples of Daotong and Kinzo would never be kind enough to tell him about this. Ever since the death of the art saint 2,000 years ago, even the term Taoist painter had almost disappeared from the secular world. There should be a story behind it. Listening to its sarcastic and incoherent speech, it should be someone who understood human relations, but might not be completely clear about human etiquette. What were the three animals? Cows, sheep, pigs. The highest standard for the emperor's sacrifice, also known as the Thai prison. This silly gremlin actually asked if he brought the three animals. Sure enough, it was a silly gremlin who didn't know much about the world. Li Yunxin smiled and reached out to touch the clay sculpture. Just a little cat monster, but its appetite is not small. The temple suddenly became quiet. After a while Li Yunxin heard it say, "Ah, cat monster? Oh, I'm not a cat monster, huh? I'm Mrs. Sanhua." "Ah, Mrs. Sanhua, how dare you? Huh? How do you know I'm a cat monster? Tell me." "Ah, I'm Mrs. Sanhua." "Your name? Mrs. Sanhua, isn't it a calico cat? And you talk like a psycho. The whole race is psycho, isn't it just a cat?" Li Yunxin curled his lips. "Little cat monster. If you want to eat meat or incense, it's easy. But you have to help me deal with the person outside first. You were the one who created the female ghost earlier? Good job. But I can teach you something more fun." It had been a few seconds since Li Yunxin came in, and the swordsman should have arrived. But the swordsman should not dare to come in. What happened before was enough to make him understand that this young man was different from those people in the escort agency. He was an opponent that must be dealt with seriously. If he wanted to kill him, he must kill him. He looked out and found that the swordsman had rushed out of the woods. But when a dilapidated temple suddenly appeared in front of him, he was bewildered. He used the thin sword in his hand to point forward diagonally before he slowly walked towards the entrance of the temple. He was extremely careful, and it was obvious that he had hidden some mysterious changes in his internal footwork. But it made him look like a street dancer. Huh. Fun. Oh good. Humph, without the three animals first give me a body? Hey, I'll help you, Humph. What's fun? Li Yunxin suddenly felt a breeze around him. The wind swirled past him, rolling up a small piece of dust on the ground. This should be the spiritual body of the monster. Monsters cultivated magic power and intelligence, but they didn't have the elixir to refine their bodies like human beings, so their bodies would certainly die. When the body died, the spirit didn't disappear, so it became something like a ghost after death. This was the spiritual body. This little cat monster was bold. It didn't attach itself to something with abundant reiki, and ran out to wander. If a bolt of heavenly lightning were to strike it nearby, it would be dead. Silly cat. That person wanted to kill me. If you don't help me solve the problem in front of me, how can I help you solve the problem after death? Li Yunxin stared at the swordsman behind the dilapidated door. This idiot just killed a girl. I'm very unhappy, so I want to kill him. If you help me kill him, I'll draw a portrait for you later and let you attach it. Find a temple to worship, and you'll be worthy of incense. Whether you can cultivate in the future depends on you. The cat monster grunted. Incense. Oh good. No, Humph, first get me a body, Humph. You stupid thing. Li Yunxin frowned and shouted in a low voice. You're just a monster. How dare you negotiate with me? Don't you know I'm a Taoist painter? The blessing is right in front of you, but you don't know how to cherish it? The cat monster was silent for a while. Then tell me. It's fun, Her voice was aggrieved, like a kitten whose ears were pressed down by a slap. She also sounded like a child who begged for candy but was beaten. But monsters were like this, and they were different from humans. Li Yunqing frowned again and said in a low voice, "Let me ask you, will you?" Chapter 20. The swordsman with high cheekbones and narrow eyes was called Chun Yan. He was born in a family of scholars, so his name was obvious. But now he was the leader of the 6 ghosts of Hejian, the hanged horn ghost, and his brother was dead. He wanted to kill him. Chun Yan thought, not only because he killed his 4th brother, but also because he couldn't see through him. If the other party was really a young man from a cave, or a sect who didn't understand the ways of the world, he had ways to deal with him. Those people were indeed immortals with brilliant celestial spells, but they didn't understand the ways of the world. In the blink of an eye, he was able to make them burst with joy. But this kid, he had the thought of turning an enemy into a friend. But it was only for a moment. He didn't know where this kid came from, but he was terrifyingly smart. He pretended to be courteous with him, but in the end, he didn't know who was playing who. Since that was the case, he could only kill. After killing, he burned their clothes and dismembered their bodies. In such a dense forest, they were quickly divided and eaten. After that, he divided the corpses of the others and scattered them around the area. No matter how clever he was, he couldn't find the whereabouts of the kid. He could only blame himself for being too smart and born into a good family, but not strong enough. It was rare that he wasn't strong enough. Chun Yan felt his body was slightly hot. Actually, that young man, he was very handsome. Those disciples of the cave sect were high up, and he had to flatter them. Humph, one day, he would think that one of them was trapped in that broken temple by me. When that time comes, he would be stepped on by me. When he was under me, how could he be so arrogant? How could he be arrogant? When he thought of this, he was only 4 or 5 steps away from the door. In fact, such a short distance, he could rush over in the blink of an eye. But the kid was too evil and scheming, so he had to be careful. There was something strange about this forest. It seemed to be haunted. They used to be called the 6 ghosts of Hejian, and they had seen ghosts before. Although they were shocked before, they weren't very worried. For one, he had seen immortals, and he knew that some ghosts couldn't harm people, but could only scare people. Earlier, the female ghost had vanished into thin air after being pierced by his sword, so it was obvious that she was just bluffing. He had killed countless people, but he was afraid of ghosts? What a joke. Taking another step, he saw Li Yunqing walk out of the temple with his hands behind his back. He was wearing a white robe. When he was running in the forest, his sleeves were torn by tree branches. But now those white strips of cloth were hanging on the cuffs, fluttering in the night wind, adding a bit of dust to the air. Li Yunqing held a piece of paper in his hand. The swordsman frowned slightly. Of course, he had heard of painters. Now that he thought about it carefully, could it be that this kid was a painter? In the past, he and his brothers robbed houses, so he didn't have the patience to think about the different realms of a painter and what their abilities were. He only knew that those painters who could turn shadows into shadows were rarely seen by mortals. They were all worshipped by high officials and nobles, hoping that they could make a few more paintings to prolong their lives. This young man was so young, yet he had such powerful abilities. Furthermore, he couldn't stay here any longer. What a pity. He was a brilliant painter. But no matter how brilliant they were nothing more than illusions and magic tricks. How could he compete with the Taoist priests and swordsmen of the Grotto Heaven sect? At this time he heard the young man say, "If you go any further, I won't be polite." Chun Yan sneered in his heart. This trick was no longer effective at this time. At this moment, he had pushed his inner strength to its peak. He could even hear the sound of the grass bending under his feet when he took a step. He wasn't afraid of the young man's tricks at all. He could see clearly that the young man could speak and walk with shadows. He was a real person. The female ghost from before might have been created by the young man to scare people. But as long as he didn't panic, he would be able to tell. "Die. I'll give you a quick death." He shook the thin sword in his hand. The thin sword that was as wide as a finger buzzed, like a silver snake flicking its tongue. Hit! This sword was fast and cunning. Even Xiao Duanhong from the escort agency couldn't dodge it. He believed that the young man would die, but the sword missed. The swordsman was shocked. The young man's figure suddenly became much more agile. He dodged the attack at a strange angle, took another step back, and shouted, "I'm going to cast a spell." That dodging movement was definitely not something an ordinary person could do. At least not with the physical strength of an ordinary young man. In a flash, the swordsman couldn't afford to be distracted. He could see that the young man had used a lot of strength to dodge just now. Now that he had used up all his strength, it was impossible for him to dodge a second strike. With a shake of his wrist, the silver light turned back like a snake and went straight for Li Yunxin's throat. At this moment, he saw the young man finally shake the paper in his hand. A green light flashed. The swordsman found that a dark green figure suddenly appeared between him and the young man. At first glance, the swordsman found that the figure was a little strange. It was a general in green armor, holding a light green broadsword, and wearing a strange helmet. It was inlaid with green gems, making it look like a fly. What kind of person would dress like that? But the swordsman knew that this was just an illusion. He couldn't be distracted and let the young man take advantage of it. He focused his mind and ignored the sword slash from the swordsman's illusion. He wanted to pierce through the illusion and stab at Li Yunxin's throat. But there was a splat. The head of the swordsman Chen Yan flew into the air. The sword of the general in green armor was almost hit by the swordsman himself. This was not an illusion. It was a real entity that was materialized by a transcendent master. After killing the swordsman Chen Yan and being stained by the blood of a living person, the figure of the general in green armor suddenly became blurry. He sheathed his sword, turned around and nodded at Li Yunxin. He said solemnly, "My sword is your sword." Then it turned into a light spot and disappeared. The headless body of the 6 ghosts of Hajian, the swordsman Chen Yan, fell to the ground. Li Yunxin let out a sigh of relief. It still couldn't last long. His ocean of qi was sealed, so he couldn't use his spiritual energy. So he asked the cat monster to take over his body. The cat monster's spiritual body provided him with some spiritual energy, so he could use it to turn illusion into reality. But after all, the cat monster's spiritual energy was weak, and it was not his own. It was summoned and killed only one person, before it was washed away by the yang energy of a living person. But the cat monster didn't feel the thrill of life and death. It asked in a strange tone, "Ah, dead. Ha, what is that? What is the green general, Li Yunxin heaved a sigh. There was a hint of nostalgia and melancholy in his voice. But the cat monster wouldn't understand. His name is Wuxia Sword Sage Yi. Chapter 21. The demon cat did not understand, so it grunted, as if it was very uncomfortable. Li Yunxin knew that it was because she had attached herself to his body. Taoist priests, swordsmen, and painting Taoist priests all practiced the divine heart technique, which was a profound inner force. Their bodies had their own noble spirit, which was different from the people of the secular world. Therefore, when a demon spirit attached itself to such people, its spirit would be rejected, and it would be very uncomfortable. He took a few steps back. "Go back. You helped me, and I will owe you a favor. But now that my sea of qi is sealed, I can't make a painting that will allow you to attach yourself comfortably. When I find a solution, I will come back to you." A gust of chilly wind circled around Li Yunxin, and the demon cat muttered angrily, "Ah, in the future? Ah, how long will it take? Ha, there were people in the past. No, in the future I don't wait. Ha." She suddenly stopped talking, and the grass a few steps away became quiet. The chilly wind had gone far away. The demon cat seemed to have discovered something. Li Yunxin did not know what this inexperienced thing was up to, so he only looked at the path where it came from. But after 2 breaths, he suddenly heard a rustling sound. Someone was coming from that direction. He frowned vigilantly, and then he was stunned. A girl stumbled out of the forest, waving her hands and feet. As she ran, she laughed like a silver bell and muttered, "Ah, good, ha ha ha, this is mine, ha ha ha, hey, this is mine, he he he." The girl had a beautiful face, a slender body, and a skirt fluttering in the wind, bathing in the moonlight. It should have been beautiful. But when Li Yunxin heard the laughter, he only felt a little numb. Because it was Qiao Jiesin. The demon cat attached itself to Qiao Jiesin's body. It had been about 10 minutes since the girl died, and Qiao Jiesin's soul should have been taken away. If the black Bai Yanjun that he had never seen really existed. In fact, there was still some spiritual qi left in the corpse. Perhaps because of the special physique and timing, the cat demon possessed the body. Not only did she possess the body, but she could also move about freely, as if the body belonged to her in the first place. Qiao Jiesin ran to Li Yunxin, stumbling and bumping into his chest. Li Yunxin frowned slightly and supported him. He wanted to reprimand them, but he didn't know what to say. After all, he had only interacted with Qiao Jiesin for a day. They were not very familiar with each other. After the cat demon rubbed against his chest for a while, Li Yunxin sighed and said, "All right. This can be considered your good fortune. You didn't help me in vain. I've heard of such things. In the past, there were also demons who possessed corpses. And there were also righteous masters who did it. After all, corpses were bound to rot. Making the best use of them was already a heavenly Tao. However, there are a few things that you have to pay attention to." His parents had told him these things, and he remembered them all. He just didn't expect that they would really come in handy today. There were some rules and regulations for such things. They might not be as strict as the laws and regulations of the future, but there were always some rules. In the past, he didn't understand, and only thought that it might be pedantry. But now that he saw the cat demon and the ninth young master, he felt that he understood. The ninth young master almost looked like a human. He looked like a human, dressed like a human, and spoke like a human. But he picked up a human and ate them, just like how a human picked up a chicken leg and ate it. In the eyes of a great demon like him, human etiquette and education were all bullshit. Human beings were meant to be eaten. There was no possibility of communication, just like how humans in this era did not know how to communicate with pigs and dogs. Moreover, there was no animal protection nowadays. This cat demon did not have divine power like the ninth young master. She possessed a statue and had a temple. She probably did not do as evil as the ninth young master in the past. But from the way she spoke and acted, she did not seem to understand the ways of the world. These beasts were not humans after all. Cultivators often said, "Those who are not of the same race must have a different heart." In fact, there was some truth to it. Therefore, there were some rules. You are a demon. Someone would not build a temple for you for no reason. You must have received help from an expert. In that case, that expert should have told you about some rules. I was afraid that you would forget it after a long time, so I will tell you again. Li Yunxin looked at the familiar yet strange Qiao Jiesin and said, "You knew that I could help you, so you helped me. This is a life-saving grace to me. So there's a connection between us. Maybe the person who helped you before had a similar identity as me. Just now, you possess my body and saw my divine power. So I can help you, but I can also harm you. It all depends on whether you can be a good person. Now, I want to tell you that once you possess a human body and enter the human world, you must abide by human etiquette and education. You are a demon, so you may be wild and hard to tame. But when you encounter something that angers you, you have to think deeply for 3 breaths before deciding what to do. First, you must not kill. Second, you must not marry. Third." At this point, Qiao Jiesin suddenly knelt down in front of him and looked up at him. A pair of big black eyes shone brightly in the moonlight. Her face was pious and serious, and there was even a timid expression. Li Yunxin was stunned for a moment, then realized that this little cat demon was listening. For the animals and spirits, many things that people take for granted are laws for them. People think that filial piety to parents is a matter of course, that not eating one's own kind is a matter of course, and that etiquette is the most common thing. But for the animals and spirits, it is a law evolved from the great Tao of human relations. It seems that this little cat demon has really been enlightened before, otherwise, she would not show such an expression now. Li Yunxin suddenly felt a little better and smiled slightly. Third, you must have a correct view of the world. Qiao Jiesin blinked, and tried to speak like a normal person. Ah? 3 views. Huh. Is that a big temple? Are you going to build 3 big temples for me? Li Yunxin smiled. 3 views are the outlook on life, the world and values. You don't need to understand them. Just understand them. You will understand them later. But if you want to follow me, we still have to go to the city of Wei. Your body. Let's say that you are scared to the point of losing your mind. After all, we have a place to stay there, so we have to take care of the other people in the escort agency. Well, it doesn't matter if you don't understand, just follow me. When I tell you to get on top of me, you get on top of me. Let's go and save them. What a big tone, young man. As soon as Li Yunxin's voice fell, another voice sounded. This voice probably belonged to a young man, about 22 or 23 years old. It was pleasant and magnetic, and the ending tone was high, with a hint of unruliness. Then, a young man in a brocade white robe came out of the woods. Li Yunxin frowned and his heart skipped a beat. When this person came out, there seemed to be a gentle force around him that pushed away all the grass and trees, and none of them could touch his clothes. His steps were light, and it seemed that even the grass would not bend under his steps. Wherever he went, even the chirping of the insects became gentle. Under the moonlight, there was even a faint layer of brilliance on his body, as if he was a celestial being. Li Yunxin knew that this unfriendly young man in front of him practiced the divine heart technique, a profound inner force skill, just like his parents. But he should be from Daotong or Kenzo. Considering what happened tonight, he should be the head disciple of the Lingshu sword sect, one of the 72 sects, and a fellow disciple of Kong Kanzi and Qi Songzi. He should be the one who sent the flying sword message to the 6 ghosts of Hejian, asking them to kill all of them. He should have come before, but he didn't. Now he was here. Li Yunxin took a deep breath and smiled. Good evening. Thank you for coming in person. Where are those people? By the way, what's your name? The man walked to a place a dozen steps away from Li Yunxin, glanced at the headless body of the swordsman on the ground, and shook his head slightly. A mortal. Then, he looked up at Li Yunxin and smiled absent-mindedly. My Taoist name is Huainanzi. I saw some on my way here, and I killed some of them. It's getting boring. Tribulation is always troublesome. You're also a cultivator, right? Well, you practice the divine heart technique. Which spiritual master? Heh, definitely not. You had a conflict with my 2 junior brothers, and your ocean of qi and mountain of snow was sealed by the Lingshu sword sect. A few days ago, I found out that my 2 junior brothers were dead. But I don't think you did it. It should be some big demon. But since you're involved, and I can't take revenge on that big demon, I'll just kill you. First, it's a memorial for my 2 junior brothers, and second, it's a tribulation. Don't take it too hard. You're actually going through a tribulation, but it's a death tribulation. Well, have a good journey. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.